Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Well, Man City have got a League and Cup double, trying to go for a treble. Man United lead the season with just the one trophy. Their season's over. Man City obviously have the Champions League final next weekend. Obviously, West Ham are playing in the Europa Conference League final in the middle of next week. So yeah, lots to discuss. Obviously, the French Open is taking place. Obviously, Rafa Nadal has actually now announced that he will be retiring at the end of next year. 2024 will be his last year in professional tennis, and Djokovic has the opportunity to become the greatest of all time for major titles won because Nadal will no longer be competing for them. Other news: FIFA is continuing its ongoing battle with broadcasters surrounding the Women's World Cup later this summer, which will be taking place in Australia and New Zealand, so the winter in the Southern Hemisphere, over TV rights, and is still threatening to black out broadcasts to 5 countries, including the UK, which is quite interesting. Um, Hopefully that doesn't happen, but that would be really damaging for the women's game. Still no news on who will be the replacement host for the 2025 Rugby League World Cup. News on that has gone quiet at the moment. But France pulling out of hosting is a massive blow, as I said. So that's going to be interesting how that pans out. There's a lot of players who are off contract this summer who look likely to join the Saudi Arabian Professional League in European football. Benzema will be leaving Real Madrid. We know Messi's going to be available in the summer because I think his relationship with PSG is broken down. Barcelona have got Busquets and Jordi Alba, who are leaving for nothing. And I find this bizarre that these players, they could have got some money back from in the transfer market. They're allowing them to go to market for nothing. Um, a lot of these clubs are very, very wary of the new UEFA spending rules that will be coming into force. They've got to trim their wage bill drastically. Um, and it's these high profile clubs that have got rather bloated uh, salary salaries that are just letting players go to market for free, not even attempting to re-sign them, just letting them go. Likelihood is that the Saudi Arabian league where Cristiano Ronaldo is playing will pick them up. So that's going to be interesting. Major League Baseball, obviously, they've got their London series of games coming up between the Cubs and the Cardinals in a couple of weeks' time. Done a video on that discussing the lack of promotion for it. I've only seen one advert so far for the games this summer. Complete contrast to 2019 when Major League Baseball went into overdrive in regards to the promotion, the advertising, and getting those promotional materials out there. And bombarding the advertising in the print media, on TV, on the internet, on social media. I find the lack of adverts for this quite troubling. A lot has happened, obviously, between 2019 and now. The situation globally has changed economically. Major League Baseball itself is coming off the back of a lockout last year. Yes, I will be watching the Champions League final. I fell asleep, so I missed the Europa League final because I fell asleep. But I'll be watching the Conference League final and the Champions League final. Um, I think Man City will have to play a lot better than they did against Manchester United. Um, I think they will have to up their game. I wouldn't say there were some people in the comments section said that the FA Cup final yesterday was a poor game. I don't think it was a poor game necessarily, but it wasn't the best final I've seen. And I think the fact that it was played in June, that's the first time ever the FA Cup final's been played in June, obviously apart from the COVID Cup final in 2020. It's the second latest time in the year the FA Cup final has ever been played. Some of the players look really out on their feet very early on in the game. They look very, very leggy, very, very tired. It's been a very disrupted season with the World Cup. I think Man City do have to play a lot better than they did yesterday. They're still on course for the treble. Obviously, but this time last season, we're talking about Liverpool being on, battling for a quadruple. So, it, yeah, yes, but I'm surprised it was the first time Manchester United and Manchester City had met in an FA Cup final. I found that one quite a striking stat. Um, it was very obvious. Haaland, if you can keep him quiet, if you can stop the passes from De Bruyne reaching Haaland, you can take him out of the game. I think Inter Milan will be targeting that pathway of possession. Um, yes, they did play in the Community Shield, and I think they also played, I think, in a couple of League Cup finals, but they've never played in an FA Cup final. That's what is really striking about this, is that they've never played in an FA Cup final against each other. Was it the most anticipated? Look, it was record breaking for the quickest ever goal. First time the two teams have met. Um, and Guardiola's record in finals is ridiculous. But I think Ten Hag, considering when in the opening weeks of the season where Man United were to where they are now, the journey they've been on over the last 12 months since he was installed as permanent manager, I think you could class that as a successful season for Manchester United. They've got some silverware. There seems to be a plan and direction with Eric Ten Hag. The ownership issue is going to be the problem for Manchester United going forward. What happens with the Glazers' ownership? Do they sell a partial stake to Sir Jim Ratcliffe? Do they sell a full stake to the Qatari bid that's on the table? So the ongoing ownership of the club is going to be, I think, what causes more problems going forward. I did notice even in the crowds there were those banners saying the Glazers out. There was still that protest movement. Um, on the Man City side of things, obviously this ongoing investigation into their finances and their and you know, what punishment do we get out of that? Will they have titles stripped? Will they be thrown out of the Premier League? Will they get a points deduction? All that kind of stuff. And Guardiola has stated that if that is the case, he's gone. Um, I am and I'm not. And it's slightly cooler than this time last year. I will admit that. It has been slightly cooler, but it hasn't rained now where I live for a couple of weeks, which is very, very striking. Now, obviously, I've been watering my strawberries and my mint plants in the garden, as you've seen on a couple of videos. But I am concerned, and I do think the weather is going to heavily impact things like the Ashes and Wimbledon, and motorsport, the British Grand Prix, for example, the start of next season in the football and the rugby union. I think it will impact the rugby league, Super League season. But I am concerned that we may see similar temperatures and similar conditions to last summer. It was only 11 months ago that we had all those heathland forest fires, wildfires all over the UK. We've already got one massive one in Scotland, um, and that will have an impact on sport, no doubt. No doubt will it have an impact on sport. Yeah, no, now that my last block of flats, I didn't have a communal garden. We didn't have a garden. There was a few plant pots scattered around the communal car park, but they weren't well maintained. This block of flats do have a communal garden. A couple of my neighbours and myself do enjoy our garden. We have barbecues. My neighbour upstairs actually planted the strawberries. I salvaged the mint, which I thought had died in the heat wave last year. It got battered. I mean, mint's a very resilient plant, but it's kind of nice just to, when you get home from work or when you're relaxing on a day off, just to spend some time in the garden, even if it's only 20 minutes, half hour. It's kind of relaxing. No, it's I rent my flat. Everyone in the building rents. The landlord owns the land. He doesn't do a good job of maintaining it, so we, the residents, are doing our best to keep it as tidy and as maintained as possible. Um, so yeah, we've got some strawberries going. We've got some mint going. I think my neighbours planted some potatoes and a few other vegetables as well. So we've got a fair bit going, and it's a good hobby. It's a good hobby to have. So yeah, I do a bit. I will have to water the plants again. In palm seeds. I'm more interested in getting some sunflower seeds, but I think it's a little bit late to plant them now. Might have to do that for next year. Very, very tempted in planting some sunflowers. See how grow them. I did that as a kid. I used to have sunflowers. I used to plant sunflowers, but it'd be quite interesting to see if we can get some sunflower seeds, plant them. But I think we're a little bit late in the summer now, or spring. How do I think Newcastle do in the Champions League? It's going to be interesting to see what they do in the transfer market. I think there's some good players that are going to be available from the three relegated clubs who have shown that they can play at that elite level. There's some very good players off contract who are free agents, so they don't have to spend big in the transfer market, ironically. There are some clubs in Europe and in England who've got to shed salary because of the new spending rules that are coming into force. Um, so it's going to be interesting to see how Newcastle do. I think they're going to make a few additions in the summer. But they don't have to make massive changes, I don't think. Um, it will be interesting to see how they do. But look at the form under Eddie Howe since he's taken over. He's got the best managerial record, I think. He's one of the win percentage, their points that they've acquired in that time frame. Um, they deserve to be where they are. How did Blackburn do in Europe? We had some horrific Champions League seasons, and in the old UEFA Cup, which is now the Europa League, we reached the knockout stages a few times. I think got to the round of 16 or round of 32. Blackburn's European record is not actually that good, to if I'm being brutally honest. Um, so yeah, some clubs can do really well domestically, win trophies domestically, and then they fall flat when they've got to compete on the domestic and European front. It just shows how hard it is to do. You do need squad depth. You do need good scouting, a good youth program as well, to supplement your first team squad. But they've made squad changes with rule changes in regards to how many overseas and how many young players. We don't really have a reserves competition anymore, which we used to have back in the day, where you would have your first team squad and your reserve team squad. Player gets injured or suspended, you call someone up. They've been playing quite regularly, so they're match fit. They can just slot in. We don't really have a reserves anymore. It's senior squad and under 21s. So they capped squad sizes a couple of years back after the financial crisis of the late 2000s. They brought in some rule changes to control spending that way, which has actually had a negative impact. And now we've got the five substitution rule, which I don't necessarily still agree with. I think COVID's passed now, that emergency's passed, and it's here to stay. And that's something I have to do a video on. God, drop me, mate. Is COVID's impact on sport, because so many sports have brought in rule changes in regards to the state of play and tweaking their rules, not just on finance, but actually on field product. It's very, very interesting. So rugby league's brought in the six again. Rugby league's brought in the 18th man. They've gone from 2-1 refs again in the NRL. So rugby league's been impacted. Football, the five substitution rule, that wasn't there before. Rugby unions brought in a lot of rule changes in the last 3 years, which I think are actually damaging the product, not helping it, rather than enforcing the existing rules as they were before. So there's been some very, very interesting things that have come out of the last 3 years. There's shot clocks that have been brought in to speed up play. There's a whole range of things that have been brought in to a lot of sports. We've seen regulation changes in motorsport, in various categories of motorsport. So a lot of changes have been brought in by a variety of sports, and we have to look at that. Not just look at the changes that sports have brought in, but also the financial impacts as well. And this is why I'm surprised that my Major League Baseball isn't doing more in regards to advertising their upcoming London series. Very, very surprised by that lack of advertising, that lack of promotion in comparison to 2019. I know the economics have changed somewhat, and the economic climate post COVID, and with the war in Ukraine and Russia. Um, um, I think we need to look at the handball rule and how it's interpreted. If that's in an attacking sense, if Grealish does that in an attacking sense, accidental handball doesn't count anymore. The goal would have stood if something like that was in an attacking sense. But in a defensive sense, accidental handball hasn't had its rule tweaked or changed. It should be an indirect free kick. You see them given once or twice a season across every single league. That's like literally, you'll see all the defending players basically on the line. and a free kick taken inside the box. For They need to just say handball was handball, like the foot foul rule in basketball. Accidental or deliberate possession goes to the other side, and so it got Man United back in the game, that penalty. But yeah, no, VAR, in my opinion, has failed there. There was a lack of actually applying the rules of the game, the laws of the game as they're written down. Accidental handball is an indirect free kick. The rule has not changed. Um, so if deliberate handball, that's different. That's accidental. And if that is deemed as deliberate, that should be a yellow card as a minimum. If that was a goal scoring opportunity, a red card. So the inconsistency and the lack of actual application of the rules is the problem there, and that's where the referees have become a little bit cautious. They're relying on the video assistant referee to make the decision. But I felt the refereeing team and the linesman had a poor game. Oh, his eyes were shut. Now, what's he meant to do? He's on the way back down to earth. His arms are just flailing because that's what naturally happens when you're in the air. He hasn't made an attempt to put his hand towards the ball. He's not opened his palm out properly. It's sort of semi-fisted, so it's not as even like he's in the gravity has taken over. He's jumped and he's coming back down. He's missed the flight of the ball. Okay, he's competing for the ball. He's made no attempt for his arm to swing towards the ball. He's not trying to slap the ball. He's not trying to punch the ball. He, I, ah, this is where I think the interpreter, even before VAR, we rarely saw an indirect free kick given, and that falls down on the referees not knowing the rules of the game. Because if you've got a VAR official there, have the rule book out. Honestly, like understand the rules of the sport you are officiating, and this is where I argued about getting that officiating right. It starts at grassroots level. It starts on a regular, every off season. All the full time officials at the top level. It should be like, okay, you're going to be our officials for the professional game. Gather them around. We go, right, these are the rule changes we're making. These are the rules that clearly are so rarely used. We're dropping them. These are the rules, and they need to be clear and concise. They must have these meetings. But the issue is at grassroots level, you don't have the technology, you don't have the money, and this is across all sports. The only sports that seem to get their rules right because they are done by black and white. There is no interpretation. It's cricket and tennis. The ball's either in or out. It's either a wicket or it's not a wicket. It's a no ball, and they have the tech and they use the tech in the right ways. Um, like both codes of rugby, ice hockey, football, there are so many interpretations of the rules that it's yeah. Well, cricket's been using tech, the video replays for no balls, snickometer, Hawkeye for donkeys years. And for a sport that is not nowhere near as wealthy as association football or rugby union, they are light years ahead of so many other of the sports. They're light years ahead of in that regard. That's one of the few things I think cricket has got right. And I've been very critical of the governance of cricket and the direction cricket's taking with media rights deals and accessibility and a whole range of other issues. But on a officiating standpoint, they use the tech very well. There's still that interpretation from the umpire: is that ball spinning towards or away from off sun? If it's a spin bowler, where's it pitched? Has it pitched in line for an LBW? But apart from the LBW calls, where Hawkeye has to be used, and it's only where the ball pitches, not where the bowler releases it from, but the pitch. Is it in line and length? That kind of thing. Height. That's open to a bit of interpretation. But no ball's a no ball. A wide's a wide. Leg byes are leg byes are byes. Fours are fours, sixes are sixes, singles and double and twos and threes, and that kind of thing. Run outs. They use the tech very, very well. And with a lot less money behind them. I think football, I'm going to say soccer because people will watch a replay of this later, but association football, let's be clear on that, is lagging so far behind other professional sports that have less money. Football globally is the wealthiest. Their resistance to using technology meant that when they finally started implementing the goal line, the video assistant referee, it was always going to be fraught with failure. Yes, stop the clock. Stop adding all the extra. The added time in the World Cup was just painful. And Infantino is the wrong guy to lead FIFA because he was Blatter's assistant. They need to completely clear house, get some new fresh faces in there. The problem with sports governance, and I'm going to say this off the bat, it is the old boys and the old girls club. So if you've got female administrators, let's say it's netball, it'll be the same women who are involved when one of them moves on from a position of governance. Someone who's already in the organisation just slots in. If it's the IOC, the Olympic committees, when someone else just slots in who's already in the organ, they need to have outside people coming in to be the administrators at times because it is the old boys and old girls club. It's been the governing bodies of sports have been in various countries at national and international levels have been dragged across the coals because they don't. There's poor governance, be it a toxic culture, corruption, whatever the issue may be, or there's a scandal of some kind, like the Israel Folau scandal with Ryden Castle in charge of Rugby Australia. Firstly, she was a foreigner, which went down. Admittedly, she was a Kiwi. Yes, she'd been a sports administrator to a high level, but in a less high-profile sport, which was netball, which is fine. She'd worked as a high-level administrator in sports, so she had an idea of the cutthroat nature of sports administration. But she was a foreigner. She goes in. The Israel Folau thing drags on for a while. It leads to massive ramifications for Rugby Australia, sponsorship deals, etc., negative press, how they handled it, freedom of speech, the whole thing. Very divisive, actually showed weak leadership. But yes, I do think they need to stop the clock, stop the watch when players are receiving treatment or every time the whistle blows. Absolutely. Very quickly, they'll stop time wasting. Well, this idea has been brought forward before. There are some games where the whistle barely blows. Um, I've seen some games that flow really, really well, and some games that don't. It'll be interesting to see if they were to experiment in some pre-season tournaments with matches and actually study the footage. But then I have no faith in the footballing authorities doing it properly. Um, they it took them until 2014 to get goal line tech, whereas cricket and tennis and other sports have been using goal line technology or Hawkeye or video officials for a good decade and a half, sometimes 2 decades before the instant replay, before football brings in the use of technology. Um, and then each league has its own style of play, its own intensity, pace of the game. Um, so it would be interesting to see some independent studies to see if it actually does impact the game, if it is actually how long is the ball in play, how many stoppages per half. We need to look at how many times the whistles blow because some referees do allow the game to flow. Other referees are more strict when it comes to the application of the rules and the laws of the game. So we'll see what happens there. Spanish refs are diabolical. Let's move on from that. Paul Kent from NRL 360. Well, Gordon Tallis is, I think, now basically on there indefinitely, at least for the rest of this season. I think he's been an adequate replacement, but I would like to see Dan Janane possibly go in there as the journo and Brave being the ex-player just to give that balance. But no further news that I can find. I've been looking at the news quite regularly. When he had his court appearance, the police were considering bringing further charges. That obviously hasn't happened at this time, which says to me that the case might be quite weak. But as far as I can tell, he was charged with, the various assault allegations. His ex-partner was arrested but released without charge pending further investigation. So there were 2 arrests over that weekend. He's had his initial court appearance. Initially, when reports were first surfacing, New South Wales Police were considering, bringing further charges. That obviously hasn't happened up till now, although anything could happen. Obviously, the time difference, Australia is further ahead than I am. They're like 9, 10 hours ahead on the east coast of Australia. So anything could happen like at any time. Obviously, he's got bail conditions and an AVO. His ex-partner's got an AVO. I don't. The Australian legal system, varies from state to territory and all that, different territories and states. But it's very similar to the UK legal system with some variations. So he'll have bail conditions. As far as I'm aware, nothing else has been released to the mainstream media at this time. So there's been no further media releases, press statements, or anything like that. I think there'll be more to come out, basically. In regards to Gordon Tallis, he does come from it where, um, from a player's point of view. Um, Admittedly, Braith retired a little bit more recently than Gordon did, but Braith's an outside back, Gordon's a forward. Gordon Tallis is a Queenslander, Braith is a New South Welshman, so there's a good balance there as well. Um, so it's going to be interesting to see if they decide long term to keep Gordon Tallis. They might decide to mix it up a little bit, where they'll give Gordon Tallis a couple more weeks. They might bring in Dan Janane again. They might bring back Yvonne Sampson. They might rotate it a little bit, which is not necessarily a bad thing, having that rotating host. I think that could suit the format really, really well. So we'll see what happens. Can Brisbane win the minor premiership and then go on to win the grand final? Look, start the season, every team has an equal chance. In theory, in practice, that obviously doesn't happen. Some rosters are stronger than others, but Brisbane have a very, very. They're doing better than this time last year. Although this time last year, going into the Origin period, they were in a similar position and they fell away. But look at the table this year; it's incredibly tight. I think there's 2 points covering what 2 to 4. I think it's 4 points covering 9 teams or something. It's exceptionally tight. One win, one loss. The table completely changes. So at the moment they're in a strong position, but things can change quite rapidly. I mean, look at the Melbourne Storm. They were in a close game and they lose by 20 odd points. So anyone can beat anyone. I mean, the Roosters narrowly beat the Bulldogs. I missed that game, so I'll have to watch that game later. But it's going to be interesting. It's the general most watched league in Australia. They've been in a ratings battle and a viewership battle with the AFL for a while. The AFL was leading at one point. The NRL is now overtaken, in part because they resumed earlier than the AFL in 2020. That helped get them on more TV screens, both domestically in Australia and New Zealand, and then, of course, overseas. The AFL, however, in the US, I believe, is slightly more popular than the NRL at this time. The NRL obviously is very, very keen to take regular season games over to the US from next year. So we'll see how that plays out if they are serious about a long-term investment in growing the game in North America. What do I think of the FA Cup final? Not the best, not the worst. Referee had a poor performance. The 2 Man City goals, shall I say, were brilliant. The intensity level of the game was there in patches. I think Man United were second best. I think the best team did actually win. Wasn't the worst FA Cup final, but wasn't the best. I've seen better FA Cup finals. I think having it so late in the year and how this season's been disrupted, I think did impact how the players somewhat. Both sets of players looked absolutely out on their feet. There were some very tired players very early on into the game, but I didn't think it was the best. The La Liga final of the season is going to be interesting. Valladolid, Celta Vigo, Almeria, Valencia, Getafe, and Cadiz, and Espanyol and Elche. It's going to be interesting. Some big clubs in there. Obviously, Valencia, Espanyol. They've won silverware before. So there's some big clubs in there. It's going to be interesting. The AFL. I mean, the AFL is an interesting one because they play it across the national, is the top level. The situation with the AFL is the Tasmania situation of who's going to be replacing Gil McLaughlin as CEO. I think that's something that I think needs to be resolved. Obviously, at the end of last season, he said he was standing down. That was going to be his last year. He's still there because they haven't found an adequate replacement yet. So that leadership side of the AFL is starting to be questioned about the direction the sport's taking. The Tasmania situation as well. Are they going to have a team there? Is a stadium going to be built there? They've made a mess out of that. You've got the Hawthorn Hawks racism inquiry that's becoming an absolute shower of shit. So the culture within the sport, the governance of the sport and the league. Um, so we'll see what happens. In soccer, what we call football over here, as rugby league is referred to as football, the Central Coast Mariners won the A League after almost being wound. That feel good underdog story. The thing is, the A League is really struggling to get a foothold in Australian sport because of the dominance of the NRL and the AFL. Really struggling to get a foothold and grow the game. Um, it's a because of the FIFA World Cup and the success of Australia regularly qualifying, some of the best Australian players playing in Europe. That's helped raise the profile, but still lagging far behind in talent. But there's a fair fan base for the European leagues in Australia. The A League, I think, will slowly gain in popularity, especially if leagues like the AFL and NRL continue to have um, issues in regards to scandal. That always helps, but the A League is still, trying to um, establish itself as a healthy product. I wouldn't say no one in Queensland, New South Wales watches AFL. The Brisbane Lions are quite a successful AFL team in recent years. I wouldn't say that's the case. I think the AFL has been more successful in taking their sport, Aussie rules, to rugby league territory than the other way around. I think that's where the NRL falls back a little bit. Is where they place teams, very East Coast centric. Um, yeah, Western Australia definitely isn't underrated as a rugby league location. The state of Victoria could do better, especially with the Melbourne Storm having been there for 25 years. I'm surprised they haven't got a stronger state league. But you've got the Barassi line is a well known thing. If Valencia do get relegated with the first since 86, 87, yeah, it would look that would bankrupt Valencia if they get relegated. Yeah, well, that is quite interesting. Now, obviously, that's TV viewership in the Brisbane metropolitan area. Um, I wouldn't say the thing is the Broncos for so long weren't challenged in Brisbane. Now you've got the Dolphins. That's going to really change the viewership habits of many because a lot of people would have watched Brisbane games to see them lose or want them to lose. Um, so again, we have to look at average attendances and look at grand final attendances. The fact that rugby league is an international sport where you can play test matches against other countries quite regularly, I think helps it on a global standpoint. The AFL is very niche, but it does have a following in the US. And in part, that was again the resumption following the COVID pandemic. When the US major leagues were shut down, Australia was the first English speaker. I think Korea or Japan had their baseball league go up and going quite early on. But the AFL and the NRL getting those leagues up and running and then fans back in attendance quite quickly in comparison to North America and Europe, I think definitely helped a little boost in their viewership figures and their finances. Swans Grand Final got 375,000 in Sydney and plenty of secondary league fans watched. The NRL prelim final that night between South and Penrith. That's not bad. But look, those numbers aren't massive differences. But yeah, that's the Sydney Swans. Sydney is a massive urban area. You're going to get transplants from other states. Same with Melbourne. But when you think of it's an interesting one. But look, the Sydney Swans have obviously got a fan base there. If nearly 400,000 people in Sydney watched that game. Um, and a lot of them obviously stayed to watch Penrith and Souths beat the crap out of each other in the next time slot. So you it's a difficult one because I wouldn't say there aren't, you know, people who support both the AFL and the NRL, you know, and have a team in both codes, both leagues. You can do that, but it is what it is. I mean, I think the AFL will be quite, you know, satisfied with the numbers of fans in Sydney watching the Swans play in the Sydney market. That justifies them putting the team there. Do I think match fixing takes place in the Premier League or SPL or any? Well, I think it takes place. I'm not naive to think it hasn't taken place. We know of several high-profile match fixing scandals, obviously, that have been proven, not a scandal, but actually proven that took place across European leagues over many, many years. Um, so, a- as far as I'm aware, no one's been caught doing it yet, but I wouldn't be surprised. There have been some very, very suspicious results. So, we shall see. Um, what do I think of the USA, Canada, and Mexico joint World Cup in a few years' time? I'm looking forward to it. I am. I remember USA in '94, and I can't believe that was in 1994. And then, you know, all these years later, we're going to be having another World Cup in the US. It's madness. Um, it really is madness. Uh, so next year it would have been 30. Is it 30 years? Yeah, 30 years 30 years next year since we had USA 90. That's ridiculous. It seems like yesterday that tournament took place. 29 years ago, we had USA 94. I'm looking forward to it in a certain extent. But got a long way to go and a lot of football to be played in the next 3 years. We've got to get the next year's Euros out the way. Um, before we can even start thinking about the qualification process for that tournament. It's going to be an interesting tournament. It's the first time a World Cup's been hosted in three countries. Um, and yeah, we'll have to see how it pans out. I mean, it's going to be a very, very interesting tournament because of the time zone differences and the climatic differences and the differences in culture of the three countries that are co-hosting. So it's going to be interesting. The Storm have been very, very successful. You've got to remember that, even with the titles that were stripped, they've appeared in a lot of grand finals. The Swans haven't. Let that sink in. So when you have a team regularly, appearing, locals will watch, even if it's a casual viewer. What was the time slots back in the '94 World Cup for Europe? I can't remember. I was 4 or 5 years old. Like 4 or 5 years old. I don't remember that. Well, look, the AFL does have problems. As I said, Gil McLaughlin, a successor, hasn't been announced. Their Tasmania plan to have a 19th team in Tasmania has hit the skids, and how they've organised that. There are some ongoing scandals and investigations into culture within football clubs in the AFL, racism, athlete welfare, um, you know, the complaints process. Um, and it's been quite damaging. And I don't. I think they have. I think the AFL think they're doing better than they actually are. Um, I think that's a problem. I think the AFL think they're better than they actually are, um, rather than actually having proper decent numbers for view. But you've got to remember, the AFL isn't really. And the Storm had two title strip. That was a huge blow to their credibility in the foreign market. Yes. Well, I would say that the Melbourne Storm salary cap scandal. While it's not the watershed moment, we still see salary cap breaches on a regular basis. I've actually got to do a video looking at the NRL salary cap breaches and how the Storm, while it was the biggest of all time, there have been some big ones since then. There's been multiple minor breaches every season. And I think the way, because it was an expansion team and because of News Corporation's involvement with the ownership at the time, it really left a really bad taste in the mouths for many people. I think it, it it definitely damaged the image of the sport, not only in the state of Victoria and in Melbourne, but nationally. And then very, very quickly after that scandal, we have the peptide scandal. So we lurched from one crisis to the next. And of course, the peptide scandal wasn't just the Cronulla Sharks, and it wasn't just the NRL, because obviously Essendon. And then there were individual players at other clubs as well, and coaches, and other clubs were under suspicion. So it was a very the 2000s and the 2010s for both the AFL and the NRL were very, very troubling times for a variety of reasons. And the salary cap scandals that it did involve the Bulldogs and did involve the Storm, I think obviously then Parramatta and the Manly Sea Eagles and the New Zealand Warriors, it shows how weak the salary cap um, you know system and how flawed the NRL salary cap system is. The AFL's had, I think it was Collingwood or Carlton salary cap breach. But no, at that period, the late 2000s, early 2010s, scandal, doping scandals and corruption scandals, and they hit the sport. But no, I can't comment on you know. I know that the Sydney and New South Wales are very, very different cities. Obviously, where the immigrant populations come from, um, the architecture is different. Uh, their way of life is different. You're gonna see, but you'll see that as well when you go to the US or Canada. When you're on the east coast of Canada compared to the west coast of Canada, same with the US. When you're in the northeast down to California, it is almost like you're in a different world. Same country, different world. It's like if you were to come here to the UK, the southeast of England is completely different to the rest. I will definitely tell you that now. London is completely different to other towns and cities. And I live outside London, not too far away. But you could be in the same country and you could be 2, 3 hours drive or flight or whatever it is, and it seems like you are in another world. Um, but a lot of that, I think, a lot of it to do with in Australia with Melbourne and Sydney is they've both been competing for you know you know as being the capital, investment money. Melbourne historically used to be bigger, then Sydney was bigger, and now Melbourne's slightly larger because they've added a new suburb or something, or they've absorbed a new suburb or a smaller town. They're both around, I think, 5 million, 5 point something million people each. So that's a fair chunk of change out the Australian population. Um, but the dominant sport in Victoria is Aussie rules. The dominant sport in New South Wales is rugby league. So that's a different sporting culture already. The architecture is different. The immigrant populations are different. There's a big Balkan population of the former Yugoslavia and the Mediterranean, like Greeks and Italians in Melbourne. Sydney, it's more Middle Eastern immigrants from the Mediterranean, like Lebanon, Cyprus, Turkey in Sydney. Um, and so you get that different immigrant cultures, which have an imprint again on the professional sports. Um, so there's that. Prime Vardy or Kane for the national team. I think Jamie Vardy and Harry Kane are completely different players with their style of play. Admittedly, they were teammates once, which is just amazing at club level. Um, I, hmm, that's a hard one because they're completely different. If they played exactly the same style or a very similar style, it'd be easier to distinguish between Vardy and Kane. So I'm a bit on the fence on that one. Growing up New South Wales League fan, moved to Victoria, fish out of water, AFL, still follow league. For example, NRL was on Channel 9's main channel and AFL on 7's number 3 channel in New South Wales. NRL was on 9's third channel in Vic. Oh, so they just did swapsies. Well, they've got to cater for their regional audience in order to maximise viewership. Otherwise, it's pointless putting a secondary sport on prime time and the prime sport on secondary, channel. Some sports, it's interesting. I'm just going to move my monitor because my back, I can't sit up for too long. I've got that back. Right. Okay. Now we're comfy. Yeah, State of Origin is an interesting one. It does show that they obviously played game one in Adelaide, at the Adelaide Oval, and they got a really decent crowd. The atmosphere was fantastic, and I think it was a pretty even split between um, both New South Wales and Queensland for fans in the stadium and viewership. Those viewership figures are quite healthy. I think that's what's really interesting is the AFL. As I say, does think it has is doing better than it actually is, and I think it's to do with the governance side of it at the moment. Some of the negative stories coming out. I don't mind watching a bit of AFL, but I don't religiously follow it like I used to. So I've lost that kind of attachment to it to a certain extent. Um, I so, but the fact that the viewership figures for Australia nationally were 3.4 million is pretty good. They could be better. They have been better in the past. That's something they need to look at. Is historical viewership. There was a period where viewership was dropping. At the same time, it would help the NRL massively if they were to expand to Perth, look at Adelaide, um, and have an idea of growing the game in South Australia and West Australia, because otherwise you can't really call yourself a national competition. Champions League final, City or Inter? I think City will be favourites, but they have to play a lot better than what they did on yesterday against Manchester United. I think they're going to have to up their game. They cannot underestimate Inter, even though Inter finished fourth in Serie A this season. They cannot underestimate them. They're going to have to play better. But they did look very, very tired, very tired. And the Italian league, I think, has finished a little bit earlier than the English league, so the Italian players were probably going to be more rested. The City players looked tired by the end of that FA Cup final. There were some City players really struggling midway through the second half. Well, that's an interesting that you watch the Friday night on the Channel 9, so you don't watch the Fox broadcast. You watch a full match of league, and then you watch as much as you can of the AFL game that's been broadcast the same night. That's interesting. That is interesting to me. But you know, for me, the majority of my work colleagues, you would call them soccer fans, I call them football fans, as their primary sport. For me, I'm obviously more rugby league. I'm more NHL, which is ice hockey. I'm more, sports they don't watch. But I do keep a tab on the result. Every evening, I look at the scores as they come in. Um, and I look at the breaking news stories of like players getting suspended, managers getting sacked, etc., takeovers. So I keep it on top of the other sports that are going on that that work colleagues and friends have an interest in. But not all my friends are sports fans. That's what's very, very interesting. Outside of motorsport, most of my friends aren't actually sports fans that are religious sports fans. They'll be casual fans. Um, so you have to bear that in mind. Is Haaland, Erling Haaland for the Ballon d'Or? He's only had that one. I mean, he's got to try and repeat his form next season, and I think that's going to be a lot harder to do. He looked while he was involved in that first goal with winning that first header. He had a very, very quiet game. The semi-final against Sheffield United barely got involved. He scored once in the last 7 games, so he scores his goals in clutches. But hey, we're talking about this goal scoring record. That's a one-off season. If he can repeat that and stay at a very consistent level of goal scoring, then we can have a debate about a Golden Boot winner, Ballon d'Or winner, that kind of thing. But it's one season. No, Messi should not win the Ballon d'Or. Although World Cup, his exit from PSG, the Ballon d'Or is not. It's become a popularity contest over the last decade and a half between Ronaldo and Messi and actual players who in previous generations completely different. We're talking about the best all-round player. Um, Haaland is not the best all-round player. Best pure goal scorer, yes. All-round player, no. The Ballon d'Or now is just a popularity contest between fanboys who vote, Messi and Ronaldo for so long. And when all these people say we've been blessed to have these two great players, unfortunately we've been cursed to have these two great players and not a great supporting cast. Whereas in previous generations, we had a much better supporting cast of players. And we had more variation when it came to Ballon d'Or. You need knowledge for conversations at the pub. I don't drink anymore, so I don't go to the pub. That's one of the joys of not drinking is not having to deal with drunk people shouting at the pub. I don't. That's the thing. I don't miss going to the pub at all. I really don't miss it. It to me, um, yeah, I just don't miss the pub. I don't miss drinking, and I don't miss the pub. Um, so there's that. I don't miss the pub. I don't because most of my friends aren't sports fans. That's what's very, very interesting. Most of my friends aren't actually sports fans. So I'm literally um, on my own in regards to sportsmen. My mate Sam is a good friend of mine. He's a chef, but he actually does follow the NRL. He does follow the AFL. He does follow the sports that I follow, which is really interesting. And I've had no imprint on like influencing him in any way. He's actually older than me. I've known him for a good 6, 7 years now. But yeah, got when I found out he liked rugby league and ice hockey quite religiously. We started going to games together, um, and we've had a lot of fun memories going to the ice hockey together, a lot of good laughs. Um, then COVID came along, and then I moved. Yeah, then COVID came along, and it's completely changed, things. You have to go to the pub in Australia and have one beer on a Saturday, Fox League Super Saturday. No, I watched that at home on the laptop. No, the thing is, I think I would definitely fit in Australia because I'm very passionate about sport and I like being outdoors. And but the one thing that I think is going to make me stick out like a sore thumb is that I don't drink at all. So I used to, but I don't miss it. Um, that's the one thing I think. Uh, so there's that. Um, You made English breakfast when King Charles was coronated. Do Foxes come? Do Leicester come back up next season? I've not had a full English in a while. I think Leicester have got a lot of players on contract. I think it's not impossible. Burnley proved you can do it, but it's going to be difficult. Same with Leeds. It's not impossible, but it's going to be difficult. But I think Leicester and Leeds this time round, getting relegated, that is, from previous times, are much better financially off the field. They've got more stable ownership. I think Leeds are getting that new investment from the 49ers group, which is the York family. So they're going to have that more stable financial side of things. But I think Everton are going to be the team in the Premier League that really struggles again next season. I can't see them being any different from this season, and they've got away with not getting relegated for the last 2 seasons. I can't see it happening again. Am I still thinking about moving? I always thinking about moving, but I'm here for the long term for now, medium term at least. So I have no plans straight away, but yeah, it's if the right opportunity came along, or if let's say the channel became fully profitable and was making me more money than I'm making at work, then I could obviously move and live wherever I wanted. If that was affordable. I'm getting by at the moment with where I am, just. But if the channel became profitable and made more money than I'm earning at work currently, then yes, I can consider relocating somewhere. The garden videos. Look, I'm surprised how well the strawberries are doing. I think the concern that I have, the weather. While it's slightly cooler than this time last year, um, the fact that the lack of rain again is a bit of concern. I think, as I said, obviously Major League Baseball's got its London series later this month. We've got the Ashes series cricket. We've got Wimbledon. We're going to have some other sporting events as well. I think the weather's going to have a negative impact on sport this summer. Okay, it's 1:45 here in Australia. Oh, goodbye for now then. Thank you for coming along. A pitch invasion at my club. In what sense? The answer is yes. I just can't remember when. Um, Pitch invasions used to happen quite regularly. That'd be the hooligan element. Celebrating, that would be 1995 when Blackburn won the Premier League. Be 95, I would have thought. Um, but the punishments for pitch invasions, this is the thing. It's classed as aggravated trespass here. Aggravated trespass, so you can get yourself in a lot of trouble, and a lot of trouble. The pitch invasions are less common now than what they used to be 20, 30 years ago when I was a kid. Obviously, the hooligan element, the disorder at games, which comes with football. It's the same in Europe where they call them ultras. Um, they are less common than what they used to be. The footballing authorities, like UEFA and FIFA, take a very dim view on crowd disorder. Um, but Espanyol Barcelona, for example, the other week was quite nasty scenes. I didn't watch the Sevilla Roma final because I fell asleep. I was planning to, but I fell asleep. Had a bit of a danger nap in the afternoon, but they do happen. We are starting to see a slight rise in disorder at football, but it's not as bad as what it was 20, 30, 40 years ago, for example. All-seater stadiums, much stronger policing, the use of technology, heavy fines for clubs, bans for clubs. I think Liverpool obviously got everyone banned in England from European competition for 5 years, Liverpool for 6. So things definitely have changed from previous years and decades, and also the public image with every game pretty much being broadcast live now. Um, that um, that you know the damage, the the image damage and what we saw at the Euros in 2021 at Wembley. Again, the image damage, the negative reputation, um, that hurts. Obviously, clubs get fines, but we are starting to see an uptick in disorder. Yes, he's been charged. He's the same age as me. I think he's 32. He's a bit younger than me. He's been charged with, I think it was an offensive T-shirt of some kind. You've got to be brain dead to do something like that. But it's unfortunately part and parcel of some of the idiots that go to sporting events. And alcohol and sporting events are a terrible mix. It's not just a football thing; it's a much wider sporting issue. Um, and we'll see we'll see what kind of punishment he gets. I would think he would be getting a rather large fine. Does Neymar come to the Premier League? God knows. In my opinion, the fact that Messi's never come to the Premier League is quite an interesting one. And Messi has stated he wants to play Champions League football next season. Although there are a lot of rumours linking him with the move to Saudi Arabia. Karim Benzema's on linked with the move to Saudi Arabia. A few years ago, it was the Chinese Super League that these players were going to. Now it's the Saudi Arabian League these players are going to. It'd be interesting if Neymar wouldn't survive in the Premier League. He'll be kicked out of the game. The defenders would, because he constantly dives and rolls around. Defenders would be like, "Wrong, snap your leg." Then he would have his leg snapped. Honestly, this is the difference between the modern players now and the players 20, 30 years ago. If you were a showboater and a diver and you were petulant like Neymar, a Roy Keane type player with Alfinger Haaland, for example, that was more a bit of retribution. But Vinnie Jones, those kind of players, they used to snap your leg in half. You're done. Disrespected the opposition like Neymar does and was petulant and all that. Yeah, you would not be doing it for very long. So many like Diego Forlan couldn't hack the Premier League when he came, but he came very early in his career at Manchester United. Veron couldn't quite settle. Um, so yeah, can Messi do it at a cold Tuesday night at Stoke? Can he do it at a cold Wednesday night at Sheffield United? Can he do it on a Thursday night against Luton? Look, it would be interesting if he signed a 1 year contract or 2 year contract. Uh, it would be interesting if he was willing to test himself for a season or two in the Premier League. Neymar wouldn't last in the Premier League. Um, he would be scythed down. In my opinion, he would be. Neymar it comes with a lot of baggage, and I think Messi's starting to come with a lot of baggage as well now. I think Cristiano Ronaldo played for 18 months too long. His exit from Man United was painful, embarrassing, and hilarious at the same time, but it actually helped Man United. It didn't help him. He got wealthy. Ronaldo comes across as a Ronaldo comes across as the C word. I've never liked Ronaldo, to be fair. No offense to his skill and his ability, but I've never liked him. Didn't like him at Man United. Didn't like him at Real Madrid. Didn't like him at Juventus. Whereas other Portuguese players like Nuno Gomes, Luis Figo, Rui Costa, you could go, I like that player. But Ronaldo, that generation of Portuguese players, they come across as very petulant. Um, Eusebio is one of the greatest players of all time, a contemporary of Pele. Um, George Best famously said one of the best players he'd ever played against. Nani, I think, was a solid two-way winger. Go forward, go back, good pace. Charisma, I think, was underrated. Um, But I think some of the Portuguese players that came through alongside Ronaldo were playing with the Portuguese national side when Ronaldo was a bit younger, like Maniche, Deco. Um, they had a stacked team back in the 2000s. Pepe's a thug. He's not to be beat. He's a thug, to be brutally honest. He's a petulant thug, much like Sergio Ramos. Um, but yeah, look, there have been some great players that have played the game. My favourite ever player, God, that's a hard one. That's a very hard one. Um, but I grew up with watching the likes of Batistuta, Gianluca Vialli, you know, Alan Shearer, um, Marian Pajas is another. He's another cult hero for a Southampton fan. I grew up watching a lot of Matt Letizia. Was just fantastic to watch, and he had the opportunity to go to big clubs. And he turned him down to stay at Southampton. I've been fortunate to have seen a lot of great players play the game. Nesta, both Cannavaros, Baggio, um, George Ware. Um, very, very fortunate. Martin Yeboah, Hasselbank, Celestine Babiora was a fantastic wing back when he was at Chelsea all those years ago. As I say, I think as fans, we've been very fortunate to have seen some of the greatest players of all time play. And then we've had the Ronaldo Messi era, which I think is a poor era for football. And I think UEFA's part of the problem with that, with the UEFA coefficient, how they've structured the European competitions, such as the Champions League and Europa League, former UEFA Cup. Getting rid of the Cup Winners' Cup was the worst decision they ever made, because now they've got the Conference League, which is basically the Cup Winners' Cup with a different name. But no, I would say that the 90s, the mid 90s to the late 2000s, I think, was when football was at its best. I think we've gone backwards. I don't think the game is as good now as what it was 15 years ago. I've been saying that for a while, um, and I stick by that. Um, I think money has definitely distorted the sport. I think where we are at the moment with the direction the sport's taking in the short to medium to possibly long term is concerning. And I just don't know. I think we've got market saturation, personally. More steroids and corruption back then in Serie A, etc. Corruption has always been lingering around football for a good 30, 40 years. It's not happened overnight. This doesn't happen overnight. But we're seeing a bigger rise in match fixing, corruption, and misbehaviour with players. That's not to say in the 80s they weren't doing it. They weren't testing for whatever. But I think where we're at the moment, we are at the precipice of a crossroads, personally. Oh, well, it still is. Boxing has always been corrupt. The Black Sox scandal of 1919, one of the most famous scandals, I think, in sporting history. Oh yeah, someone has to mention two guys. Look, I've been fortunate. I think I saw two guys' first ever Blackburn goal, if I remember correctly, and it was a screamer from like 35 yards, and it was a game win against Southampton at St Mary's. I was at that game. I think it was his first. Was that his first goal for Blackburn? Was that in his second season? I can't remember. It was the first. It was his first goal of the season, and it was an absolute rocket. But no, going back to the Black Sox scandal, absolutely. Um, one of the darkest days um, in American sport. It's the Lancashire Red Rose. So the white rose is Yorkshire, the red rose is Lancashire, and the combined two is the Tudor Rose, which is combining the two houses of Lancaster and York. Someone knows their history. Um, you might have been watching my history channel. So the House of Lancaster had the red rose, the House of York had the white rose. You combine the two together, you get the House of Tudor, which is the Welsh combined rose, based on Tudor family Welsh. Um, so yeah, Blackburn is in Lancashire, Leeds is in Yorkshire, hence the roses on their crests. My favourite monarch, well, it's got to be Louis, the Sun King of France, Versailles, and all that. I'm still doing my history series on the other channel. I've really got to get back to my kings and queens because I had a good run going and then I stopped and I started again. Now I've stopped again. Um, my English, oh God, uh, I haven't really got one. If I'm brutally honest. I think I just don't really have one. Like in my lifetime, until last year, I only had ever known the Queen, Queen Elizabeth. No, got King Charles. So it was just. I mean, I probably will see three monarchs in my lifetime, maybe four, um, at a push. But so far, I'm on my second. George III is very interesting because the length. He's the third longest reigning monarch in British history. Henry VIII is one of the most researched and studied in school. But there are some interesting ones. You could argue some of the later ones. King Charles II, the Merry Monarch, he's quite an interesting one. And I've got a book about the English civil wars and all that, which I'm about halfway through. I've just got to the beginning of the raising of the standard in. I think, yeah, King Charles raising his standard in Oxford and Nottingham, just on that stage, which is about 1842, 41. Oh, Walsingham and Francis Bacon. We're past that stage in English history. We're now on with James the First is snuffed it, on Charles the First in the book I'm reading. Um, John D. Walsingham, Francis Bacon. Yes, 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 yes. Thank you. Um, that period in history is when we're having the wars of religion, across Europe. So it's not just a UK thing, although France, Germany, and the UK, what we would class as countries today, and Ireland, were the hotbed of the wars of religion in Western Europe. It was an absolute bloody mess for about 100 years. Um, but how we got from that to sport? Let's go back to sport. Back to sports. Let's come back. That's for the other channel. Let's come back. Sports conversation. Bring it back in. Um, one thing I want to talk about is how do American fans feel about the major leagues, Major League Baseball, the NHL, the NFL, the NBA, taking games overseas? Did a video on that, and I'm very interested to hear American fans' feedback on the major leagues taking regular season games overseas. Celtic or Rangers, neither. Um, I don't really follow a club in Scotland. I would like to see Partick do quite well back in the top flight, and I would like to see a new club actually win the Scottish title for the first time in 37 years, because I think that would be more beneficial to Scottish football than Celtic and Rangers swapping it every so often, in my opinion. Um, but no, I did a video yesterday in regards to the major leagues, and then it's the TV, isn't it? This is why a lot of English fans, when it comes to the FA Cup, have complained about the FA Cup final, where they brought the FA Cup final time back to its traditional time slot, 3 o'clock, for the kickoff yesterday. Since I think is it 2011 or 2007? I think they changed the kickoff time to later, and fans have not been happy with that for about a decade. The FA decided this year to bring it back to a traditional time slot, and that's a complaint that we've had. But when it comes to the major leagues taking the NFL, the NBA, Major League Baseball, NHL. Is your viewpoint a more standardized viewpoint, or is that just your viewpoint going, I don't mind it because of the hours you work at work, for example? Um, because I would like to get some feedback because when in La Liga, Barcelona and Girona went to take a game to the US, the shit hit the fan. Like fans went nuts, the players threatened to go on strike, and then the Spanish FA got involved, and eventually the idea very quickly disappeared. Not that long after, the European Super League appears. True, but you got the Cardinals and the Cubs playing in the Major League Baseball later this month. That's a marquee kind of game. Like 2019, we had the Red Sox and the Yankees playing. That's a marquee rivalry. Um, so to me, I want to gauge the interest and the feeling because here in Europe we went nuts. La Liga fans of the two clubs involved rioted. Players across the league threatened to go on strike, and they very quickly stopped the idea. In regards to it not being the playoffs, there's a lot of rumours coming out of the NFL that the 2026 Super Bowl will be in London at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. I mean, what do you feel about that? Yes, Major League Baseball does have the oldest average fan base of any professional sport in the world. Um, and I want to see Wrexham and Spurs come to California, so I wouldn't mind my teams doing the same thing. That's where we have pre-season tours. This is the thing. So when it comes to European football, the Champions League final is the end of the European season, and the pre-season, July, August, you'll see these pre-season tours to like the Far East, the US, Latin America, wherever it may be, and these pre-season friendlies that we as fans we couldn't care at all. Um, we don't care. And the stadiums they play in are half empty. It's it's a thing. Well, from what I've gathered and from what I've read so far, there's a lot of strong reports that the NFL is considering a London Super Bowl. But this is what I find interesting is fans don't care as long as it's not playoffs. But as soon as it becomes playoff or a grand final or a Super Bowl, they go nuts. It's an affront, apparently. But why care about the playoffs if you don't care about the regular season? This is what I'm trying to gather because the sporting cultures are different. Um, you know, the history of our sports and how and our sports teams are different. So that I find very interesting. As long as it's not playoffs, you can do what you want. But as soon as you mention playoffs, fans go nuts. In my opinion, I think no, they can play more than that. I Leicester City's spicy foreign tour that was the summer before they won the Premier League. That was back in 2015. That led to the manager being sacked and several players having their contracts ripped up and being fired from the club. Um, it yeah, that unfortunately that happens far more regularly than professional sports teams would like us to know. I don't know about it. Happens quite regularly. Pre-season, off-season shenanigans, and it happens quite regularly. But now social media has become so ingrained in society, you just can't get away from it. Um, some yeah, I think what people don't realise is load management. Load management. Um, and people go, well, football, soccer, as you would call it, but football, it's not, you know, it, because you're constantly moving. There's no standing still on it. You're constantly moving. You're constantly in motion. You basically got to run a marathon and then kick the crap out of someone. Rugby league is very similar. There's constant motion. Um, and some rugby league players, let's think of this: if they play every regular season game in the NRL, it's 24 games. Then you've got the three state of origin games if they're eligible, and then you've got 4 games, including the grand final. You could be playing 30, and then you've got the internationals as well. You could, if you play every single available game and every minute of every game. So let's say you're an outside back or um, one of the forwards, you can play 80 minutes. That is a lot of brutality on the body. Brutality on the body. So players like Cameron Smith, who people say is the GOAT because he's played the most first grade games in Australia. I still think Adrian Morley's the GOAT, but that's another thing. Um, he barely missed a game. He barely missed a game in the best part of 20 years. What's the closest you've ever been to a pro stadium? Half a mile. Major, I wouldn't say Maidenhead United is the top flight pro team, but they were playing in the same league as Wrexham at the time. And Wrexham's first game after they were purchased by Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney was against Maidenhead United. So um, I was down the road from there. The old Bracknell Town Stadium was literally round the corner um, from my old house. On a match day, on a match night, you could hear it from my house. Um, right now, the closest professional sporting facility to me is Reading Football Club's training facility, which is about a mile and a half from where I live, 2 miles from where I live. In a straight, is it a straight line or do I have to walk a little bit? So I could, I could, in theory, walk near to um, Reading's training ground, which is about 2 to 3 miles from where I live. It's not that far. Um, but in regards to major sporting venues, I haven't. I'm in that kind of part of the world where a lot of the players live, but the teams are a little bit further away. So a lot of the London-based professional teams, a lot of their players live in the Thames Valley, which is the part of England that I live in, as it's classed as an area. So a lot of the sports teams are actually based in London. We do have Reading, obviously, but a lot of the players live in this part of the southeast of England, outside of London, where they own property and then they commute into the training ground and they commute in to play games. Um, so there's that. But I've never lived right by a stadium or right by anything like that. Oh, the old Joe Lewis. Is that even still standing? Because now you've got Little Caesars, which is the replacement. Is the Joe Lewis Arena still there? Or have they demolished and redeveloped it? I know because obviously the Red Wings and the Pistons have obviously moved down. Um, um, oh, it's gone. I knew that obviously Little Caesars was the replacement for the Red Wings. I just wasn't aware that the old Joe Lewis was finally condemned and gone. I don't live near the Valley. Yeah, the old Charlton Athletic. Um, the Silverdome is a relic. Detroit as a city is a mess. Um, and its sporting teams haven't done particularly well in recent years. That lack of success is starting to hurt them. I mean, the Red Wings made Detroit a winning city, but there was a period of time where players refused to be traded or signed for the Red Wings in free agency. There was a period of time where players, if they would put Detroit on a no trade list. Um, Now the Red Wings are, as a team, are a desirable team to play for again. Gary Sanders, God, we are going back some now, aren't we? So if I can circle back to the major leagues taking regular season games overseas, what would actually be the reaction if the Super Bowl was played in London? Because I think the NFL, in fact, all the major leagues, I think that's called market saturation at this point. While I don't mind them coming here, I think there is going to be do there's obviously got to be a point where the domestic fans are going, how many regular season games are we losing? You know, and eventually you are now seeing the potential for a Super Bowl play overseas. Well, this is what I've heard reported and read reported. Whether it actually comes to pass when they actually put these Super Bowl locations for the next 3 years up to tender after 2025, because we know Vegas has got a Super Bowl. I did a video on it not long ago. So, but I think it's quite interesting because I don't watch the NFL games on the TV in London anymore. I don't watch any of the games they take overseas. Um, I've got bored of it. I used to, but I've got to the point now where I feel that market saturation and that fatigue. It doesn't do anything for me. I don't think they'll ever take the Super Bowl overseas personally. Way too much American corporation money involved to take it away. The thing is, um, there's a lot of American corporations and American money over here. There is a lot of American money over here. The fact that all the major leagues at some point are planning to or are playing games in London or in Munich or in Paris says to me it you know may not be so far fetched. Now, the fact that they've obviously now announced it for San Francisco, okay, but we'll see. But there was also that rumor that we know the NFL wants to have a team in London. If the NFL actually got a team in London, then they would have to have the opportunity to play a Super Bowl in this country. Now, the NFL roadmap initially, when they came to London in 2007, was to have a team here by now. And the fact they played regular season games in London means it can be used as a Super Bowl location. Um, and Tottenham Hotspur as a football club have a long term arrangement now with the Jacksonville Jaguars and the NFL. Wembley's arrangement, I think, needs to be renewed after next year. I think Wembley's obviously been hosting games there since 2007. Um, would UK fans pay 5,000 plus for the worst seat in the house? I think where Major League Baseball, for example, got things wrong in 2019 was the upper end ticket price. The cheap tickets sold out immediately. The upper end tickets didn't sell. The medium tier tickets sold, but they couldn't flog the expensive tickets at the same rate. Um, would someone pay that? Well, it's an interesting one. I think the divide between the rich and poor is becoming starker. The middle class are worse off. Um, I'm not so sure many would, to be honest. Your stereotypical sports fan in the UK is working class, potentially middle class, and we are fanatical, very fanatical. But they had issues trying to sell the two Major League Baseball games in 2019 with the ticket pricing. The upper end ticket price was above an average ticket price that a Major League Baseball game would be in the US. And the lower end ticket price, while it was bang on the money, You now add on inflation, and we're 4 years down the line. It's going to be interesting to see what the ticketing prices are for 2023. And then you look at the NFL series. Now, I've said this before in videos, and I will say this again. A guy I know, he's a high profile. He works in the accounts department of our very, very large supermarket chain in this country. He's on a very, very big salary, good money, very good money. Similar age to me, has earns more than I do. Let's just say that he's on a very, very good salary. Before COVID, I said, because he always goes to see the London NFL games. He always used to go. And I said to him, "Are you going to the London games this year?" And this was in the summer of, I think, 2018 or 2017. He went, "No, can't justify it. Can't spend the money. Can't justify it anymore." And he was on a very good salary then. He's still on a very good salary now. This is before COVID, and he said, "No, I can't justify doing it anymore." And he had not missed a game at all since being a teenager back in 2007. He had gone to every single London series game, and he stated, "I can no longer afford to justify the spend." I mean, this is a guy who appeared on TV dressed as a penguin with his mates. They all wore penguin onesies. Was dressed as a penguin at Wembley, famously, and basically stated he could no longer afford to, to, to go to games. So that says to me that the ticket price, the NFL's obviously made a lot of money off the London series over a very long period of time. Obviously, they've been going now for so long. I mean, what it was 2023, so that's what 14, 15 years they've been going. And when someone says to you, "I can no longer justify the spend," that's a telling statement. If you want to have a team in London, a hardcore fan can no longer afford to go on a regular basis. There's that. Yeah, American sports fans. I mean, how do you feel about sponsorships on jerseys? Because obviously the NHL, the NBA, the NFL are bringing in these the sponsors on little patches on the jersey. We've had advertising all over our jerseys for decades. The liberalisation of gambling laws is a concern for me. I think we in Europe already know about all the online gambling companies that after the financial crash, massive uptick in gambling firms online and gambling ads. So we've had it for over a decade now, and it starts to get to you a little bit. The fact you've actually got betting in stadiums now is a level above what we've got over here in Europe. A level above, on a level that we haven't got, and we're trying to push back against it. But the sponsorship on jerseys would have been an inevitable one. But over in Europe, we've got very, very used to corporate sponsors on jerseys and in stadiums for a very, very long time. I just find it very funny that the most capitalist, business-orientated society in the world, which is the US, has a complete meltdown with jersey ads. Complete meltdown. You hardly notice the sponsorships anymore. The 7-Eleven logo on the Stars helmet is brutal. I think what is interesting is, as I say, I'm so used to sponsors on jerseys. I mean, but some of the most iconic football jerseys and rugby league jerseys are known for their sponsors as well as the club. So Liverpool with the Carlsberg and Candy washing machines back in the day. Blackburn Rovers with McEwen's Lager. Leeds United with Strongbow. Man United with the Sharp Viacom. Man City with Edios and then Brother, which was an electronics firm. PSV Eindhoven with Philips. AC Milan with Opel, which is a German car company. Fiorentina with Nintendo. Then we go to the Rugby League, where you've got the Canberra Raiders with the Canberra Milk logo, Parramatta with Pertec. So some of these iconic sports kits are iconic not only because of their colours and what the clubs are, but the sponsors they had on them. So Inter Milan with Pirelli, absolutely iconic. I think Bayern Munich T-Mobile was a long time sponsor of Bayern Munich for a long time. Dortmund had several high-profile sponsors for a long period of time. Absolutely iconic. Well, now it's Barcelona is Spotify, but Barcelona were one of those few clubs, not many, but few clubs that never had a sponsor until recently. And now we know why they got sponsors. Is Barcelona is bankrupt, basically. But some of these iconic jerseys are known, and the sponsors, are known with them as well. So Chelsea had Autoglass for a while, and then Samsung. There are some very, very JVC Arsenal jerseys are iconic. The Dr. Martens West Ham United jerseys are iconic. Some of my favourite football jerseys are iconic partly because of the sponsors. And that sticks in your mind. And that's obviously a very good advertising campaign for those companies as well. The Fly Emirates, I think, is not as iconic as Autoglass. The Autoglass jersey from the 90s is the iconic one. That's when Gianluca Vialli goes there. That's when Gianfranco Zola goes there. Frank Leboeuf, Emmanuel Petit. That is the iconic jersey of the 90s. The Detroit Fords versus the New York whatever. As I say, some of these kits and some of the sponsors at the time become iconic, and they are remembered quite fondly because of the success or the players that wore that kit. But as I say, as a European, my entire life we've had sponsors on jerseys, entire life, and so we've become so used to it. In America, it's only been in the last couple of years, and obviously the reaction from fans, they're having a meltdown. They are having a meltdown. Now, on the betting side of things, the gambling side of things, I think what is happening in the US is they've opened a Pandora's box, and it's almost as if it's open season, place your ads anywhere, etc., etc. Whereas over here in Europe, we're pushing back against that, and we're bringing in new regulation against that, and we're considering banning adverts at certain time frames and certain sports broadcasts. I would say American fans are more plastic, and yeah, it's more manufactured. It's not as natural. It's not as it's well, I've sort of adopted a few teams simply because I've been watching sports since I was 3 years old religiously. So that's 30 years I've been religiously almost addicted to sport. And I will say this: the difference in our sporting cultures is part of that. The difference in our sporting cultures has definitely got a big part to play in how the fan base reacts to certain things, the engagement between teams and the community, owners and the community as well, and what we are seeing with a lot of the overseas owners who come into English football, for example, or rugby union or rugby league or ice, whatever sport may be, and they want to invest in the sports, is they don't quite get that engagement with the fan bases right because they see it as a global brand, and they don't quite understand the link between their sports team and the local community and then the wider fan base. The hardcore fans would be the people who live right by the stadium, whose father and grandfather supported the team. They might have had a relative play for the team, that kind of thing, and that link with the community. Um, so you've been watching football, the proper football, 10 years. So, yeah, I mean, this is the thing. I'm assuming you might have been to the UK or been to Europe and watched a football match. But a lot of Americans, when they come over here and they want to catch a game, they forget that we segregate our fans. So when American fans come over here, and this has happened, they forget that apart from rugby union and cricket, we segregate our fans in ice hockey, rugby league, association football. Because if you're sat in the wrong fan zone, you cheer at the wrong time, you're getting your head caved in. So they're always shocked when they get to buy their ticket, and the ticket seller goes, "What team are you buying a ticket for, home or away?" And they're like, "What? Are you here for the home team or the away team? Because we have to segregate you to keep you safe." Yeah, and they're in for a very rude shock when they they are told that we separate the home fans from the away fans. They just are not expecting that to happen. Um, but yeah, like some clubs have had the same stadium for 100 plus years. They are ingrained in the community. Um, so yeah, but if people think, oh, River Plate, Boca Juniors. My cousin was in Argentina at the time. River Plate got relegated for the first time in their history, and Buenos Aires burned for a couple of days, and it was more than just riots. It was mass looting. It was gang violence sprung up, and it just, yeah, it's a different culture, um, completely different culture. Uh, that got violent. Um, the rivalry between some teams and some, it's certainly, it might be one district of a city versus, like, so Hamburg, for example, you've got St. Pauli and Hamburger SV. Ooh, that's a nasty rivalry in German football that people don't realise. Very nasty. Um, you look at some of the rivalries in Italian football. Only 5 cities have had the top flight derbies. So that's Verona, Milan, Turin, um, excuse me, Genova, and Rome. Are the 5 cities to have that. At least 2 clubs from the same city wanting to kill each other. And it's not just your brother can be an Inter fan and you're an AC Milan. No, it's districts in the city. Yeah, Millwall. Millwall are the most notorious, but I think every club in London has a rather um, nasty. Crystal Palace are quite notorious as well. Um, I've got one or two friends who may be involved with a few elements of society. Chelsea are quite disliked as a fan base, and but there's a lot of fan bases that are quite disliked. Um, but it's saying that I think any London club playing any London club, it doesn't matter if it's an FA Cup game, League Cup game, regular season game, you're going to have um, very, very hostile atmosphere. As a visiting fan, as a player, the atmosphere goes up a level, um, and is quite intense. Do I feel punishing Roman Abramovich and Chelsea was just? Well, they've been hinting for several years that he was happy to sell the club. The club never run out of profit under his ownership. The club um, has regularly breached transfer policy rules and youth player rules. Um, there's been some ugly incidents with the fan base. Um, was it just though? He was one of those sanctioned individuals. So, well, Man City, I think they will because UEFA investigation did find them guilty. They got off on a technicality on majority of the punishment because of time limitations. The Premier League doesn't have time limitations, so in theory, yes, they should be punished. Um, I think Everton will also have some punishment as well. Um, but if they're to properly enforce the rules in regards to financial fair play, the majority of clubs um, will be in breach at some point. I can't see them, unlike Juventus, who match fixed back in the 2000s, I can't see them stripping titles and retroactively awarding them. However, I can see heavy fines, relegation points deductions. But it's like the Marseille all over again with their dodginess back in the early 90s. They were allowed to keep their Champions League title. And they were very dodgy at the time. So, in my opinion, it's a difficult one. They got some of their points back, then they got hit with another points deduction. So Juventus, they got points deduction, appeal, points deduction. So they were punished twice. They miss out on Europe. That's a big blow. Um, but Juventus have been involved in multiple scandals now in Italian football, and so make of that what you will. Um, in regards to the Man City situation, it can't. This has been rumbling on now for several years. This didn't happen overnight. More's come out since the UEFA punishment. There's more evidence. So that is an ongoing situation that could rumble on for quite some time. And Guardiola stated that if they are punished, he's leaving because he would feel lied to by the ownership and the board. Sadio Mane or Mohamed Salah? That's an interesting one. The fact that Firmino's leaving as well, I think, is going to make it difficult for Liverpool to fight back into the top four. Um, I think Sadio Mane was more important to that team than Mohamed Salah. Ironically, I think he did a bit more in the team going forward and back as a two-way player, but Salah scores more goals. I find it an interesting one in regards to the dynamics of that dressing room. But I felt that both players are always conducted themselves with integrity. They're very likable individuals. But as I say, they always conducted themselves with great integrity. Always were very, affable with the media, very open with fans, very approachable. Firmino out the front three was the one that I never liked. Um, whether Sadio Mane felt he was being sidelined and not getting the spotlight. They had slightly different roles in that front three, though. But I think now Liverpool are weaker up front than when Mane was there, and Firmino on the way out as well. It's going to be an interesting one for Liverpool. But Liverpool need a bit of a squad turnover, and they need to freshen up. Um, they've had a disappointing season. So that Raheem Sterling. Oh God, Raheem Sterling is an interesting one because all the clubs he's played for have won the Premier League, but yeah, I think he's overrated. There's a lot of deficiencies in his game that he hasn't fixed, which at this stage of his career he should have fixed. And his shooting percentage is horrific. Absolutely horrific shooting percentage. I felt sorry for him in 2018 with the media spotlight being on him and some of the articles written about him. And I don't think the media coverage of him wasn't very pleasant. So, yeah, Raheem Sterling. Why Man City let him go is beyond me, however. I didn't get that move at all. It hasn't worked at Chelsea. It could work at another club. The fact that he demanded to leave is a very interesting one. I find that one very interesting as well, that he wanted to leave the club. I find that a bizarre move. I know he's from the London area, so I can understand him wanting to move back down south, but there are other clubs where I think he could have fitted a system better, had, done better. Grealish is not better. Jack Grealish is playing in the wrong position at Manchester City. He's better. He's more better in a central role, but you've got Kevin De Bruyne and Gundogan in that role. And when he was at Aston Villa, he was in a more central play better. He always wants to be in the middle, but then you've already got De Bruyne and Gundogan. So I don't understand why Grealish went to Manchester City apart from a pay rise. Aston Villa, they're doing. I think Unai Emery is going to get them some silverware. Watch for Aston Villa in a League Cup or an FA Cup to break their trophy drought. But Grealish leaving Villa, I think, upset the balance of that club for a season or two. And it's like Calvin Phillips leaving Leeds; they haven't recovered losing him. So some of these transfer moves, I don't think are serving the players very well where they've gone, because they're not fitting into a system or they're not getting enough game time, and it hasn't really benefited the clubs they've left apart from financially. So it's an interesting one. Grealish's best position is in the middle. He will have far more impact on distributing the ball and on the game. I mean, he had more goals per game averages at Villa than at Man City's goal per game average has dropped. So there's that. It's a difficult one when you've got a stacked team. You're not going to be able to play every player. Like Mahrez scores a hat trick in the semi-final, doesn't play in the final. Mason Mount and Chilwell and some of these other players, I just don't know. Again, they're all very, very similar and they play similar. Like Ward-Prowse could leave Southampton. He's a very good player. And if you are a Premier League club wanting to freshen up your squad and add depth, if you've got a player like Ward-Prowse floating around, he could be available. You want to snap him up. Out of Burnley, Sheffield United, and Luton Town, who will survive in the Premier League? Who has a crystal ball? I mean, this season, all three promoted sides stayed up, which is not unheard of, but is exceptionally rare. So on that one, it's who knows. Honestly, it's a who knows answer with the three promoted sides. I think Burnley and Sheffield United, because they comfortably, you know, got promoted, especially Burnley got comfortably promoted, is an interesting one. Um, but Luton were not expected to be in the playoffs. We're not expected to get promoted. Whereas Burnley and Sheffield United are set up to be Premier League clubs. Whereas Luton Town, it doesn't matter if they go up and go back down again. It wouldn't be a disaster for them to get relegated. But for Burnley, if they didn't get promoted this season, they would have been in financial difficulty. Sheffield United, uh, it's a difficult one. I think Luton are the surprise in being there. But this is where Luton kick on in the off season, sign some good players, and then do something that we're not expecting. Like Nottingham Forest weren't expected to get promoted last year, so we'll see, and we'll have to wait and see what the teams do in the transfer market, and the fact that there's some good players off contract, there's the fact there's some players who are agitating for moves. It's going to be interesting. I think Luton Town could 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 do a Derby County and get 11 points or less, or they could do what Ipswich did in their first season in the Premier League, um, with Marcus Stewart up front and finish fifth. Something bizarre could happen where they go on a run. It's so unknown what these clubs are going to do. But looking at the clubs that got relegated, yeah. My thoughts on Kylian Mbappe and Jude Bellingham. Um, yeah, Jude Bellingham, I think, is a fantastic young player. We'll see where his future lies this summer. Mbappe, I think if Mbappe is to become the best player in the world, he has to leave PSG and he has to try in the Bundesliga, the Spanish league, the Italian league, or the Premier League. Um, he has to give one of those leagues a go, um, to really cement himself as the best player in the world right now. Um, but Mbappe and Bellingham, they also have teammates to help to a certain extent. Um, they can't do it all by themselves. Mbappe can go missing in games. Bellingham can go missing in games. Bellingham, however, when he has a bad game, he doesn't allow that to affect him, or when he has a bad moment, doesn't allow that to impact him. But I think PSG, I think we're starting to see the changing of the guard again. I think with UEFA's new spending rules and PSG having to drastically cut their wage bill drastically before the new spending rules come into force next year, I can't see Mbappe staying there much longer. Um, he's going to have to leave the French league system and go to one of the other top European leagues, um, or he's going to have to be accepting that he won't get another wage rise. That this is his big contract, because I do think we are going to be seeing a sort of salary cap system across the European leagues implemented, or an unofficial salary cap. There's no way. Football finance is unsustainable and has been for 15, 20 years. It's overinflated. It's a false economy. It's like the subprime mortgage crisis in the US back in the 2000s. Um, the wages are overinflated. The transfer fees are overinflated. Um, it's like COVID never happened with football. Did you see the Hamburger SV fans went on the pitch? They thought they got. Yes, I heard about. I heard about what happened with Hamburg. They can get through via the playoff um, format. They're not completely not promoted. They can still get promoted. But yes, it reminds me of the Man United Man City title chase when Man City win their first Premier League title win. Aguero scores the winning goal against QPR, where both sides thought they had won it. Um, But Hamburg's too big a club to be stuck in the second Bundesliga. Um, um, Far too big a club. Uh, they've got a Champions League to their name. They're far too big a club to be stuck at that level. But bad decisions have been made at Hamburg for a long time that led to a decline of the team when they ended up where they ended up. It's the same with Schalke, like Werder Bremen. These sides were regularly competing in the Champions League for many, many years, and what was the UEFA Cup, which is now the Europa League, and they've ended up in becoming yo-yo teams and struggling, and they and you know some really poor scouting, player development, and transfer decisions were made. Uh, yeah, I mean, VfB Stuttgart again are too good a side to go down, um, but it just shows how ruthless a promotion relegation system is. No club is too big to go down. Um, no club is too big to fail. This is where Bilbao, Real Madrid, and Barcelona. I mean, how much longer they can? I mean, Bilbao, how long can they keep their Cantara policy, and Real Madrid and Barcelona? I mean, how long can they, you know, uh, keep piling on the debt? Because at some point the system's going to break. Um, it's clearly not sustainable, the model. And people say Barcelona will never get relegated. Real Madrid, they if they can't pay their players and they can't sign players, then it doesn't matter how big a brand you are, you will fail. Um, but then we'll see what happens with Hamburg and Stuttgart. But this promotion relegation playoff is a format that I don't like either. There's no perfect promotion relegation system. We can all agree on that. Um, there's going to be a player exodus from Southampton. They've got wealthy owners, but there's going to be a player exodus. I think Ward-Prowse, I think he's rumoured to leave. If he leaves, a lot of their good players will just leave. Same with Leicester. Um, and I think to a certain extent Leeds, I think Bamford and Notto is a good young player coming through. I think a lot of Leeds players will up sticks as well. Um, but again, board decisions at board level. Southampton and Leeds, for example, having 3+ managers per season is not going to do you any good. Yeah, RC Long. I've got to do some more club histories on European clubs at some point, but it's good to see some clubs get back to the Champions League or back into European football for the first time in a generation. So that's good for the fans. That's good for the competition. But by the latter stages, it's always the same teams in the latter stages of the competition, especially Sevilla dominating the Europa League, for example, before the UEFA Cup, adding to their record. So when I do the Sevilla video, I can say they're the record holders for the most titles in this competition. Um, and, you know, Champions League. I mean, the three Italian clubs could all lose the three European finals. I don't think that's ever happened before. Yeah, but Newcastle back in the Champions, well, back into Europe, let alone Champions League, they're back in European places. I mean, that's been a long time coming, but again, ownership has been a problem there until the new owners come in. New owners, you get that bounce, you get the right manager, you get the right transfers, start making the right progress. Um, and people are calling for Gareth Southgate to be replaced as England manager. Well, Eddie Howe, I think, is adding to his CV at this point. And the style of football that Newcastle play um, would suit the England setup. Well, I work with a couple of West Ham fans, and I want to see the English club be successful. But I do have a soft spot for Fiorentina. Um, they're one of those Italian clubs that, again, who are underrated, some of my favourite players have played for. And I want to see. I'm going into that as a neutral, but I don't mind who wins that one. Um, and if Fiorentina win, fantastic. If West Ham win, fantastic. whoever wins that, it's a good advert for European football. Only two French, again, UEFA coefficient, the French league, because PSG is dominated and Marseille is the only French club to win a Champions League. The UEFA coefficient counts against them. Simple. And PSG's dominance is not helping that league. Um, it doesn't help their league at all. And the French FA are going to very, very quickly realise, or the French Football Federation are very going to quickly realise that this is bad for our game. Same with Bayern Munich winning the German league all the time. I know it went down to the last day of the season, and I know Union Berlin and Borussia Dortmund really gave Bayern Munich a good run for their money this season. Um, and I think the German FA are starting to realise this is starting to hurt our domestic league and our national side as well. And we could be having the same debate about Manchester City winning here all the time, and it not being good. But look at eras of dominance; they happen. But it, this is where I think football is not as good as what it once was. Um, as I said, the 90s and 2000s, I think that's when we had the best era of the game. Not good if I'm right. They don't have the domestic TV rights are still poor in France, which doesn't help, and that was in part because the COVID pandemic led to the collapse of the TV rights. But the French sports market is completely different to any other European sports market where there's no one dominant sport. Rugby union, rugby league, football, ice hockey, cycling, motorsport. They all have a very kind of even share. Europe basketball. Um, the fan bases and the viewership are completely different. It's a very eclectic mix of sporting cultures and sports leagues that have a very sort of like think of like a pizza being cut into the pizza slices, a round pizza, like that. It is like that. They're all getting quite even chunks, but the domestic TV deal did collapse during the COVID pandemic, and French club finances aren't in the best condition. And the other clubs in the top flight basically, all agreed to curb their spending. PSG have decided till this season to not care about the spending, and it's catching up with them. And now Messi on the way out. Um, you know, other players hinting at exits, like how long will Neymar stay there? How long? I mean, Mbappe signed his contract extension, but can they afford to pay that? How long will these players stick around? Um, the fact that no French, apart from Marseille, no French side has won the Champions League, it's starting to impact the quality of players. A lot of the best French players don't play at the French clubs. It's starting to be a problem. It is starting to become an issue. So I don't know what the French Football Federation do. They need to get a TV deal sorted with some broadcaster. Um, Hardly any games are shown on TV. If you're a French football fan, you've got to get a VPN to watch an overseas broadcast with commentary. Michael Dunlop is now joint second all-time winners list after Superbike's success in the Ironman TT. There's multiple races at the TT. You've got the seniors race, which is the big one. You've got the other categories. You've got the sidecars. I mean, look, last year, 6 fatalities. So far, we've had one serious injury at the TT. 2005 was the deadliest year on the Isle of Man, on the Manx Grand Prix at the end of in October, and the TT in June. With 11, I think it was 11 or 13 fatalities in total. I mean, there are some people saying they should ban it. Motorsport is inherently dangerous, especially motorsport that doesn't take place on a custom-built racetrack. So rallying and road racing of motorbikes, notoriously dangerous. But it's part of the Yes, that is on one of my bucket lists, is to go to the Isle of Man TT. Yes, it is on my bucket list. But to get tickets, I'd have to book 2, 3 years in advance. I'd have to buy my tickets for 3 years' time, basically, in order to go. If they sell out like that, they go. Next year's tickets have already basically been sold. It is very, very hard to get tickets for. It's one of those sporting events that sell out almost immediately. And when the tickets are gone, they are gone. So yeah, it is on my bucket list. Like, it is on my bucket list. Um, and yeah, I would love to go. I mean, the whole island shuts down. You know, um, it's one of those bucket list things. But the price of tickets are not overly expensive, but they sell out quite quickly. And getting accommodation on the Isle of Man is limited as well, because it's only a small island with about 90,000 people, residents, and accommodation's hard to get for the entire time up there. Am I into boxing and horse racing? Um, I not as much as I used to be. I haven't enjoyed boxing for a long time. Horse racing, I watch the occasional horse race, like the Grand National, Royal Ascot. I've worked at Royal Ascot, for example, but not as much as I used to be. Um, and it's just because I just don't enjoy it. It's it's I just fell out of love with the sports, for a variety of reasons. But I'm more into my team sports, and my motorsport. I always have been. Um, I enjoy the individualistic sports. While I don't mind them, I prefer my team sports. Um, I feel more invested in my team sports. When I was at school, I played a lot of team sports. I enjoyed them more. I enjoyed playing them. I enjoyed watching them. Um, so, but saying that, obviously, while there's certain sports that I don't enjoy, I try and avoid criticising them. Like, I'm not a massive fan of baseball. I'm not a massive fan of the NFL, but I have viewers and subscribers who are. So I I don't mind doing content on baseball, the NFL, or the CFL if there's any Canadian viewers out there. I don't mind doing content on them. But I've fallen out of love with those sports. I mean, I can never really get. I mean, I have watched a few baseball matches, a few games, and I just can't, just get going. I just can't enjoy. I just don't enjoy watching it. It's like boxing. I've tuned out of boxing. Horse racing, I don't watch as much as I used to. Um, and it's sort of one of those things where I've slowly enjoy it less. Um, and yeah, it's just yeah, I've never looked at the price of tickets for the TT, but I know they sell quickly, and I know there's a limited number of tickets because of the size of the island, the population size, the amount of hotels, the amount of campsites, um, the amount of B&Bs. Accommodation is very, very hard to to book, and so booking in advance is important. So yeah, um, well, I try and not dislike fan bases or teams. When I was a bit younger, before I had the channel, obviously I had my passionate dislikes of teams. I didn't like certain teams winning or doing well, and it's a thing. But I've become quite neutral in a sense. There are certain fan bases, however, that do have a bad reputation. There's certain teams that have a bad reputation in a variety of sports. So, and it's not just in the English football system; it's in all sports. But I've become less biased. But unfortunately, certain clubs and certain fan bases have that reputation that just carry them around. Like Millwall, for example, and Chelsea have a very negative reputation amongst English football clubs, for example. Um, You can go over to the US and you can look at certain markets in the US, like Philadelphia, where their fans have a bad reputation. Um, and then you look at some of the Canadian NHL markets, and Toronto and Montreal come across as quite toxic fan bases with quite toxic media. And, uh, but for me, that dislike has disappeared slowly because of the amount of sport that I watch and um, the the attempts to be as unbiased as possible. Yes, the FIFA ongoing dispute with broadcasters in 5 countries in Europe in regards to the value of the broadcast arrangements. Um, FIFA's going to shoot itself in the foot. The broadcasters. Does FIFA not realise that there's been a global pandemic and an economic downturn which is impacting finance? Is Infantino living in fairyland? Um, that the broadcasters feel that they've given a fair deal, which is still more than what they gave for the last Women's World Cup in 2019, the deal that they put on the table. FIFA and Infantino are living in Gaga land, Gaga land. They're not on the same planet. It is worrying. It's not just the UK, it's several European markets. There's a threat of a TV blackout. The fact that the World Cup's taking place in Australia and New Zealand means I won't be able to watch as many games as I would like. It's going to have to be on the weekends. The fact that the World Cup is over there is impacting the AFL and the NRL, more the NRL than the AFL, about stadium availability, which is forcing, I think, the Brisbane Broncos Redcliffe Dolphins game when they next meet to be played at the Gabba. They're having to use a cricket ground for their return fixture, which is ridiculous. Obviously, when they first played each other, they played at Suncorp. That stadium's unavailable, so they're playing a game at the Gabba, which, by the way, is a fantastic stadium, and they probably will sell it out. The Gabba and it's Brisbane, and it's a Brisbane rivalry, but the NRL is doing this off the back foot for stadium availability, um, and it's going to be interesting, I think, to see how um, Women's Football World Cup impacts stadium availability for the other professional leagues in Australia and New Zealand for getting games played. This was an issue last year with the NRL and discussions with their teams in regards to availability of stadiums and having to move home games around and adjust fixturing. In regards to the TV blackout, it's a bad look for the women's game. It's a bad look for FIFA, and I think the broadcasters as well have to cop some of the blame, considering the success of the Women's Euros and the last Women's World Cup for viewership figures. I think they've undervalued what their bid was, but FIFA accepted that originally. So I don't know why Infantino is starting to get his. Infantino needs to be very, very careful. Thoughts on AFTV? What is AFTV? I have no idea what AFTV is. But talking about sports blackouts on TV, that's been a bugbear for years, and it depends on the country you're in and things. But Infantino at FIFA needs to be careful because this could be a breakdown in trust between the broadcasters and FIFA. And FIFA's got enough negative press that, and this could be damaging for the game. Why does the US care so much about the women's work? Because the women's team are very, very good. The US women and the Canadian women are two of the best nations in the world. They dominate the international game alongside Germany and Japan. And at one point, Norway had a very good women's program as well. And but I think it depends on where you are in the US. And the issue with the US women's program is that Women's domestic league just doesn't work. The European leagues started to actually work now. They're starting to break even in some cases. Some clubs are actually starting to turn a small profit. Um, the US has a very good collegiate NCAA system. Participation levels as well when it comes to both men and women and children and kids is obviously teenagers is at grassroots level, at amateur level, and what we would call Sunday league football. Recreational participation has gone through the roof. The fact that obviously the US, Canada, and Mexico will be hosting the Men's World Cup in 3 years' time. The growth of the MLS, more high-profile American players playing in Europe. The women's side of things, yeah, the US women have been very, very successful for a very, very long time. Very, very long time. But some of the high-profile female players in the US are very, very divisive. Megan Rapinoe, could not stand her. I understand some of the arguments she has and some of the points she's trying to raise, but she was possibly the wrong mouthpiece for them. The game has definitely developed massively and kicked on and evolved and improved. But yeah, the women's game in the US, the participation rates at high school and at university or college, as you would call it, are quite high, which is refreshing. Obviously, they've got a good collegiate system, but it's the problem is the club game and making the club game sustainable. Um, I wouldn't say the prime athletes don't prioritise it. I think the MLS has grown massively and is continuing to grow. Participation rates are growing from homegrown players as well as the immigrant first and second generation immigrant communities. So the established communities that have been, you know, I wouldn't call them Native Americans, but the established communities that have been there for a long time are also starting to participate. Um, so at the grassroots level, from kindergarten all the way up to high school, and then the amateur, recreational team, like you would have over here, we call it Sunday league or pub football, when you cobble together an amateur team and you play in the local district league. It's overtaken ice hockey, and it's about I think it's overtaken baseball as a participation sport. So the, so I actually enjoy watching the MLS. I don't mind watching the MLS. I find it a refreshingly to watch because it's quite an open style of play. And when you have a lower skill level, you have more mistakes, and mistakes make things interesting. They make things exciting. Um, I really wish the American fans would not try and manufacture fake atmosphere. They've got to come over to. I would say this to any American sports: please come over to Europe and watch any of our top flight professional leagues, and the atmosphere is completely different. Um, it doesn't matter what sport it is, because I find the US um, stadiums, I find the atmosphere very, very manufactured, very plastic, and I think the 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 North Americans, the US and Canadians, are going to be very, very surprised when the World Cup comes in a couple of years. How the atmosphere that the European and South American fans are going to bring. Um, um, the Mexican League, I think, is a very established league and has been for a very, very long time. Um, the the MLS, I think the MLS has had its problems and has had its issues. Obviously, they're continuing to expand. So we'll see what happens going forward with the quality level, but the entertainment level, I actually find it a quite refreshing league to watch. I find it, you know, different. Obviously, not at the same standard that the European and South American leagues are at, but they're establishing the sport. They're growing the sport. So it's a different style. Um, there's a bug that is going to seriously annoy us. So yeah, as I say, it's as I say, a different style of football, soccer. It's a growing league. Um, Fan base is growing, but again, that grassroots has exploded over the last few years and continues to grow. And in part, it's because of the success of the women's team, um, and, and that's where they have to be credited with helping grow the game. Um, at the same time, there are obviously issues with the administration, the pay, and various other things. Am I watching the Under 20s World Cup? No, I don't watch the Under 20s and Under 21s and Under 23s and all these junior tournaments. They don't interest me. Um, at the same time, obviously, some of these young players coming through will ultimately end up in top flight leagues across Europe. Um, some of them may end up in South America, but a lot of them will end up top flight leagues across Europe, um, and ultimately playing in competitions like the Champions League, Europa League, Europa Conference League, playing in leagues like the Premier League and La Liga and the Bundesliga, Serie A, etc. Um, and they're going to be great players going forward. But some of these players playing in the under 20s may end up in the lower leagues of professional football. May end up in the MLS if they can't get a spot on a squad in European football. So, but at the same time, it's like watching the World Juniors ice hockey. I don't watch it. Um, because they're not at that elite level yet. Some of them are actually playing at elite level now, but a lot of them are still in the reserves, under 21s. They haven't really had a lot of first team play. Um, they're still developing. The quality's not quite the same as the elite level yet. Um, let's see how some of these young lads do against playing against senior pros who are well established, who are gritty players. Um, Yeah, the Europa Conference League hasn't really done what it was intended to do, has it? Because the two finalists are from two of the top five leagues in Europe. So let that sink in. It hasn't done what it was established to do. Um, it's just another money maker for UEFA, really, and a money spinner for some of those European clubs to add a bit of extra revenue. Um, but it hasn't really helped those second tier kind of level of European competition where you're at that secondary level, where you're a top flight club, let's say in Poland or the Czech Republic or Denmark or Sweden. Are they making the final? No, it's the same countries continuously making European finals, and it's the same batch of clubs that have had success in the past. So, well, it's great that we've got an English and Italian club in the final. Both clubs haven't had success in a while, and it's good for them to get on that platform to then get further into the European sphere with the Europa League as the objective. Um, it's still not achieved the objectives of assisting those other European top flight leagues outside of the big four, big six to have that European success and grow and assist the growth of finance, exposure, and this is the problem with the UEFA coefficient getting rid of the Cup Winners' Cup over 20 years ago. And UEFA shot themselves in the foot at the end of the 90s, and they doubled down on it by bringing in a competition that wasn't needed. Harry Kane's future, is he going to Man United? Where's he going? Interesting one. We'll have to see who's named Spurs manager. I think he may never win a trophy if he stays at Spurs. I think I think he may never win a trophy at Spurs. But Spurs are in what I would call a situation where a lot of bad decisions taken, high managerial turnover, high squad turnover of players, and poor transfer decisions are hindering the club. They haven't really built a leadership core. Really, Harry Kane, Son, every Dyer, really, they really haven't got things right. The makeup of the squad is not elite level. They've had their trophy window. They've missed it. They've missed their window. They had an opportunity um, in the mid 2010s to. I'm gonna say last year, year before. That window's closed. They need to get some. But Lucas Moura, yeah, possibly. That was the worst Champions League final I've ever seen. Um, but that was their window, was about 2016 to 2019, and it shut very, very quickly. They had an opportunity in 2016 to win the Premier League. They blew that. They had an opportunity to win the Champions League, a couple of League Cups. Getting involved in the European Super League ended up being disastrous for them because it cost them Mourinho as manager. Um, they bring Conte in. That doesn't work. Um, via Nuno Espirito Santo. They've gone through a lot of managers, and some of the performances haven't been great. Um, they were on the up in the late 2000s, early 2010s. A young Harry Kane bursts on the scene about a decade ago, goes out on loan, then starts getting some game time under Tim Sherwood. They've had Villas Boas, they've had Conte, they've had Mourinho. How many managers do they need? They've gone through a lot of managers, won no silverware. So, what started in 2008 with the League Cup, they didn't build on that. They didn't continue to build on winning some silverware. So, they've had this nearly a generation now of being nearly men, and it's starting to become like the Rangers, 1940 chance when they couldn't win the Stanley Cup for forever. It's starting to become this running gag, and I don't know what the club do going forward to change that. Um, but they risk losing one of their best players if they don't get the right manager in, the right transfers. They risk having a player exodus. They risk going the wrong way if they get the wrong guy in. And they're talking about like Angie Postecoglou or whatever his name is, the guy who manager of Celtic, Postecoglou, coming in. Um, and they is that the answer? Is that the solution? Is that gonna, you know, does that solve it? Arsenal's season, in my opinion, no one expected them to be in the title hunt in the last couple of weeks, but they blew a comfortable points lead. They lost form at the wrong time, but they definitely went better than a lot of people expected. They have given Arteta time. I think they will come back a stronger team for finishing second. I don't think this is a flash in the pan season for Arsenal. I think they will have learnt a lot. Um, they're back in the Champions League, which is important, and I don't think we should underestimate them next thing. Possibly, but again, it's a squad game. It's not just one player. You can have a dominant player in the team, but it's a squad game. Um, and I have a lot of bugs that go into my flat that are annoying me, which are all moths. Bloody annoying. It's a squad game. It doesn't matter that he was injured. Yes, they will have learned a lot from this season. and do not underestimate them next season. I think a lot of people are writing them off for next season, but I think Manchester City were challenged, and I think Newcastle are going to be a challenge. I think Manchester United are improving. I think Brighton are going to be, are going to continue to their upward trajectory. So I wouldn't write off the other clubs just yet. I think Arsenal. Oh God, these moths are going to annoy the fuck out of me. I think Arsenal pushing Man City to the last couple of weeks of the season was healthy for the league. And they should not be underestimated. But people need to remember when Alex Ferguson took over at Manchester United, they struggled at first. They nearly sacked him a couple of times before they won their first silverware with him, and then they go on to dominate the Premier League for the first half of the Premier League's existence. So, fuck off, bug. Bloody bugs in it. So, what is I think David De Gea might have played his last game for Manchester United. I think Maguire's played his last game for Manchester United under Eric Ten Hag. I think the problem is getting a return on the investment. I think De Gea's form has been all over the place. Again, we'll see what happens in the transfer window. We'll see what happens going forward. But De Gea's been their longest-serving player. But has his time come to move on? There's been rumours about him being linked with moves away for some time. Harry Maguire, his time at Man United hasn't worked for him. And he's no longer a starting centre back. So I think we could be seeing those players leave. I think, yes, we could see David De Gea and Maguire leaving. In saying that, who would Manchester United want to sign? Do they promote from within? Do they do they who do they see as the replacement for De Gea? Because Martial is a bust as a player. He's a good player, but he's not the player he was projected to be. Um, so there's that. I think Anthony Martial, has been a failure at Manchester United. He has not panned out to be the player that was projected when he was a teenager, when he was a youngster coming through. But there's been a lot of discussion about the culture within the dressing room at that club for quite some time. Even by the end of the Ferguson era, there was starting to be rumblings about the internal culture at the club. It's a credit to Ferguson's management skill. Best active manager. It's a good one. People say Klopp and Guardiola are the two best managers. I think Arteta's really come on as a manager, and is starting to make progress at Arsenal with his style of play and how the team are playing. De Zerbi is underrated at Brighton. Um, so we're starting to see. I think Eddie Howe, has done a fantastic job at Newcastle. Um, Fantastic job. So we are starting to see, and Ancelotti is like an enigma for me. Um, he was a fantastic player, hard nosed player, but a fantastic player in his day. Um, he has proven to be a fantastic manager over a long period of time. He's won in many leagues, won Champions Leagues. Very decorated. Is he the best active manager though? That's a hard one. Is he the best active manager? It is a hard one with Ancelotti. Um, he's definitely an icon of the game, both as a player and as a manager. Definitely an iconic, character within the sport. I think Diego Simeone, with lesser resources, has consistently made Atletico a regular, contender for silverware every season. He's won a lot. He's one of the longest-serving managers in the game with one club. He has no intentions of leaving Atletico Madrid. Um, I would love to see Diego Simeone in the Premier League, though. That'd be fantastic. Um, you can just imagine him going to a mid-table club and turning them into a champion. Um, there are several clubs where I think he could suit. Um, Simeone in the Premier League would be fantastic to see. That would be fantastic to see. Um, but you've got Simeone, you've got Ancelotti, Klopp, Guardiola, Mourinho. So they're the generation of this current crop of managers. They're the best of the current crop across Europe. But Eddie Howe is starting to get in that conversation of you know of up and coming younger managers to join his contemporaries. Big Sam, Sam Allardyce, he's one of the most controversial and disliked figures in football. He really is. Um, there's been a stench of corruption around him and dodginess around him for quite some time. And yeah, he had one game in charge and one and done. Eh, let's just say I've been following football a lot longer than you have, by a good 20 years longer than you've been interested in the sport. Big Sam, he managed my club for a while. He's managed a lot of football clubs. He's a very controversial figure. Very controversial. The reason why he was sacked by England is he basically sacked himself. He was caught. Now, I don't know when the incident happened with the undercover reporter. It could have been before he even got the England job, but it surfaced after he was England manager that in an undercover investigation, sort of like a sting operation, he was called, basically saying how to get around player registration rules, transfer rules, bribery, um, a whole range of things, and he was gone the next day. Um, and we end up with Gareth Southgate in charge. Now, Honeypot, I like that one, Honeypot. I know I'm racking my brain. Who's Gary? Who's Gary? I've got a clue. Oh, Gareth Southgate. I think he's. Well, I would say this: where the national setup was when he took over to where they are now, there's definitely been an improvement. I think he's taken the team as far as he can. I think that was the debate after the World Cup whether he would stay on. He's decided to stay on for next year's Euros, but I don't think there's anyone. I don't see Eddie Howe leaving Newcastle, and I can't see anyone else who is of the required standard to take on the team. I think there's now a viewpoint from the FA that they want the yes man, which, like, imagine Venables, he did some good things with the England set up. Glenn Hoddle was doing good things with the England setup, and they weren't yes men. They were too controversial. We've tried the foreign experiment. That has had lack of success. Spain and Capello. So I don't know who is an available manager who could replace him. So I don't know where the FA, what direction they go in after Southgate decides to, because I think the Euros it's done when the Euros comes about. I think he will move on after that. But I don't know where the FA, what direction they're going next. Because the team is in a better place now than what it was before. And actually, in the last World Cup, we were actually playing better football than the Euros. And either side could have won, that game against England or France. Either side could have won that game. And as I say, some of his selections, however, some of his tactical choices are poor, and have been questioned for some time. So I don't know. I've been critical of Southgate, some of his selections and some of his tactics, but he's got to a semi-final, a final, and a quarter-final. I understand the fans' frustration because we've been close in 2 out of the last 3 tournaments, but I think he's taken the team as far as he can. But Brendan Rodgers, yes. I think he should have gone in the summer. I think change should have been done then. They made some poor transfer decisions in the summer, and the team never really found that second, third gear. They just never got going this season. I think, yeah, that's just a team that had a poor season. And it just shows how quick you can go from winning silverware to failure. It's the cutthroat nature of European football. You can be at the top of the game one season, a handful of seasons later, you're struggling. And just part and parcel of the cutthroat nature that is promotion relegation sport. Whereas in the North American leagues, you have salary caps, you have the franchise system. There's that. Are the rumours of Steven Gerrard and organised crime true? I will say this: Liverpool, like many major cities, has an organised crime element. And but I mean, his cousin played for Everton. Ironically, he played for Liverpool. His cousin played for Everton in goal for many years. Was Everton goalkeeper for many years. Liverpool. There have been rumours circulating about some high-profile athletes linked with organised crime groups going back to the beginning of professional sport. And Liverpool is one of those cities that does have a very poor areas, and Steven Gerrard was brought up an Everton fan. So was Jamie Carragher. They're Everton fans, but Liverpool were the ones who gave them the opportunity to go through their youth academy and get into the first team and have great success. But Liverpool, when it comes to Liverpool Everton, one member of the family can be an Everton fan, the other member of the family can be a Liverpool fan. There's less of a divide in the city. And Everton, yes, is the older of the two clubs. Originally used to play at Anfield before moving to Goodison. I mean, you've got Tranmere across the Mersey, in Birkenhead, in the Wirral. Football is the sport in that part of the country. But yeah, when it comes to the clubs people support in Liverpool, it's families can, one member of the family will be a Liverpool fan, the other member of the family will be an Everton fan, and the cousin will be, for example, so the wife might be an Everton fan, the husband might cousin will be a Tranmere fan. It really is like that. There's less dislike between the fan bases on Merseyside than the rest of. It's a very interesting city, but it is a city with a lot of deprivation in areas, poverty in areas, and yeah, it's a city of extremes. I'm not surprised that there's 100 clubs in London, not at all. Professional clubs, there's not many, but um, I'm not surprised by the amount of football clubs in London or in Buenos Aires or some of these big cities. I'm really not surprised whatsoever. Um, you know, London by itself could have its own league system. London could have its own professional league system, its own professional league. Um, the population of London is huge. The population of the southeast of the UK is huge. I'm part of that population demographic, and I'm live outside of London. But in the London urban area, it's classed as a mega city. In the southeast, it's nearly half the UK's population is in the southeast, so within 80 miles of London. It's ridiculous. There are towns and cities that are also got massive populations that are part of the southeast population size. I'm not surprised there's 100 clubs. Um, yeah, high schools. I mean, yeah, obviously, like a city like LA or New York or Houston or Chicago, you could obviously understand having like 100 high schools or 50 high schools or a lot of high schools, and they all have their own sports programs. But we're talking about a city of, and depending on the source you read, between 9 million in Greater London, then you have the urban area surrounding London, with all the towns surrounding London. That's 25 million people living like an 80 to 100 mile radius of London or something. It is ridiculous. Um, London itself is ridiculous because it's got more football clubs than some league systems do. Um, and then you've got to add the rugby union clubs into that. There's 2 rugby league clubs that play at a professional standard. You've got 2 professional county cricket clubs that are based in London, although technically none of them have London in the name. One's called Middlesex and one's called Surrey, and that's to do with the old county system. Historical county system, but Lords and the Oval are only separated by a handful of miles as their home grounds. You've got semi-pro to professional ice hockey teams in London that aren't at the top level, but at the secondary level. Um, you, it's ridiculous. Um, neither I hate fish and chips and I hate kebabs. I'm more of a burger, pizza kind of guy. I like curry and stir fries. I like Chinese, Indian, Italian, and I like a good burger and chips. I don't do kebabs, and I like a chicken kebab. So that's an interesting one. A friend of mine does actually run a chain of kebab vans. So I like a chicken kebab every now and then. Paprika on the marinated chicken with a pita bread, and that's it. Yeah, I like a good chicken kebab. It is just God's food. But I don't like fish and chips, and I don't like your doner kebabs. I hate them. Ross County have recovered 3-0 down to force extra time against Partick Thistle in the Scottish Premiership playoff final. I want Partick to go up personally. It'd be great to see another club in Glasgow in the top flight to challenge the old firm. And I've got to do a video on Ross County at some point, so I'll wait until this playoff final is done. But they were 3-0 down, so yeah. Good afternoon, Tommy. How you doing? Um, but yeah, London, as I say, London is mad. You know, it's an insane city with so many. I think it's got, is it 34 boroughs in London or something? I have to double check that. But absolutely mad city. Um, it's absolutely insane. Um, and then you look at the talent depth that's coming out of London in professional athletes who go on to play professional sport. It is ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. The professional talent depth in London is insane. The strawberries are coming along quite nicely. My neighbour who planted them is going on holiday. I think next week or the week after. With his sister. They're going up to Scotland for an outward adventure walking holiday through the Highlands for a week or so. So I'm really surprised with how well they've grown. Problem we've got is it's not raining. It is not raining, and the temperatures overnight. I'm going to quickly check the weather, but I know the temperatures in the daytime are a little bit below where they were last year, which is not a bad thing. Um, but the temperatures at night are a little bit cold for this time of year. But as the week goes on next week, temperatures start to climb, and then next weekend we might be getting some rain. So it's going to be anywhere between 23 degrees Celsius and 26 degrees Celsius over the next week. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit. But we are due to have rain apparently over the weekend, or a chance of rain. Whether that actually comes to pass or not is another thing. So we're due to possibly have some thunderstorms next weekend. So that'll be a bit interesting. And then it dries up again. So we have the possibility of some thunderstorms, but the temperature is going to rise to the mid to high 20s, low 30s. Thoughts on one team dominated leagues like Scotland, Germany, France, and it becomes dull. Fans start tuning out. Eventually, fans start tuning out. This is where the argument for salary caps and the stronger UEFA spending caps uh, are being driven. Ah, hello, Michael next door. My neighbour next door has just got into the chat, so I might pop next door for a coffee in a little bit when I'm done here. So I won't stay on here much longer. Yeah, Bayern were challenged. It went down to the last day of the season. And Union Berlin were in there challenging for the title, which is fantastic. Seven Bucks Productions, owned by Dwayne Johnson, is reportedly in talks with the local group of businessmen to make a documentary in Southend United. Yes, there have been rumours linking Dwayne The Rock Johnson not only to a documentary but a potential ownership bid, which is interesting. There's a potential ownership bid on the table that's in the pipeline, and Southend have had their money issues, and they've had their issues with unpaid tax bills and debts. And they're not the only team to go through this. Obviously, the COVID pandemic ultimately has impacted professional sport. We've seen two professional rugby clubs go out of business. A third may go out of business. London Irish have been given an extension to try and find a solution to their takeover. Can they get that takeover of the line? Can they secure funding long term? And in football, Macclesfield went out of business. Obviously, Bury went out of business just before the pandemic. 6 months before the pandemic hit, Bury went under. Macclesfield went under at the end of that season of the pandemic. So I wouldn't say the cup final was the worst cup final we've seen, but I wouldn't say it was the best. It wasn't worse. I think the goal after 12 seconds gave you that impression that Man City would just dismantle Manchester United, and they should have. Very wasteful in front of goal. Um, but no, the players did definitely to me looked quite fatigued quite early on in that cup final, and um, the fact it was played in June, I think obviously with the World Cup taking place when it did interrupt the season, but the players didn't look at the same pace as, let's say, last year's cup final or the 2019 cup final or some of the cup finals in the past, which was played at a much higher intensity and pace and were more entertaining. I wouldn't say it was the slowest pace, but it was very broken up. It was very bitty. Um, Man City couldn't do what Guardiola teams normally do, which is a hybrid tiki taka, high intensity, high pace pass and move. Man United just dug in there. Then they had their opportunities and couldn't take them either. There was a lot of wasteful finishing. Um, a lot of sloppy play, but I think fatigue had a bigger part to play in it than the tactics. I think the disrupted season with the World Cup and playing it in June rather than April or May, I think, yeah, I think definitely. I think Man City do have to improve if they're to beat Inter. I think Inter will be more dangerous than Manchester United. And they've got the Champions League final, so, you know, um, and they've been competing in all fronts in Italy all season. So the domestic Italian Cup competition. So Inter are going to be a dangerous team. They should not be underestimated. And you know, they've recently been to a Champions League final themselves. A lot of the players involved with that title-winning side played in that Champions League final, which they lost. Like European, was it Champions League final or Europa League final they lost? But so they have that knowledge of we failed the last time, we're not going to fail again. Um, and yeah, Man City would definitely have to up their game. Inter have had a week off, so Inter have had a bit of time off. The Italian season's done. They're going to be fresh. They're going to be rested. Yeah. Are the charges hanging over Man City potential treble? Here we go. Well, they're guilty. We all know that. UEFA found them guilty before more evidence has come out since UEFA's decision was overturned, partially on appeal, because they still had a fine and some punishment level to them. I think it was a transfer embargo for a big period. Um, so we know they're going to be found guilty is the punishment. In regards to that investigation, it's starting to drag now. There's been no new news on it. Guardiola's hinted that he wants it done quickly, but Guardiola's also hinted that if the club's found guilty, he walks out the door. So it's going to be interesting to see how that off-field drama plays out over the coming months. Um, Man City are trying to dig their heels in and protest and delay as much as possible. Um, and when it, you know, when it does come to Judgment Day, I think we're going to be stunned by the punishment they receive. I can't see them being found not guilty of the breaches because we know UEFA found them guilty, and the Premier League are doing more intense investigation. They've got more evidence against them, so we shall see. The current football ownership rules and UEFA rules are a farce. Um, so, what would they rather have? A barrister who's not? I mean, they beat Arsenal on the field. They beat them in the league. Well, would they be happy if it was a Spurs fan, or would it make them happy if the barrister involved was that's desperation if they're not happy that he's an Arsenal fan. He's a lawyer. He has to be impartial. If there's no impartiality there, then he shouldn't be a lawyer. Um, you know, he's been given the task with his team to investigate on behalf of the Premier League. He was the best available contract lawyer and sports lawyer that was there. You know, he was one of the best lawyers available and one of the best lawyers in his field in this country. So if it was the other way around, I mean, that's clutching at straws, trying to say, oh, it's fixed against us when they've been breaching the rules for years, and it's been well known they've been breaching the rules for years. The problem is the far side of it is how weak UEFA and the domestic leagues have been about enforcing financial fair play over a long time, because Barcelona and Real Madrid have been breaching it for decades. PSG breach it. Right? It's just farcical. If they were to properly enforce the rules, 75% of clubs would be docked points, fined, penalised, and relegated. That's the farce. The farce is allowing it to get to this stage. The farce is not enforcing the rules for so long. That's the farce. Yes, QPR did, yes. A lot of clubs, though. A lot of clubs are in breach of the spending rules as they currently stand. But UEFA and then the domestic FAs, if they were to properly go after every club, my God, it would be that would be the farce, because it just shows how weak their governance has been for so long. If we had strong governance from the beginning, and the leagues and the FA and UEFA saying this is how it's going to be, and properly enforcing it, story's different. Problem is UEFA are scared of the European Super League idea, which has been around since the early 90s, which is why they rebranded the old European Cup to Champions League, and why they restructured the Champions League, and then restructured the UEFA Cup by rebranding, and then getting rid of the Cup Winners' Cup, and they brought in the Confederation League thing, to again basically replace the Cup Winners' Cup 24, 25 years after they got rid of it. UEFA have allowed the clubs to dictate to them the structures of their tournaments. Postecoglou, allegedly, but I think Celtic would be it would be a mistake for both Celtic. I think Celtic doesn't help Celtic, and then Spurs. He's got to try and unite a very fractured dressing room, and transfer policy is going to be a key issue, because he's got to go in there. He's got to get talking with Harry Kane, and Son's already signed his contract extension, but Harry Kane is going to be the big one. And yeah, look, if there's a fourth European competition, I've tuned out. Don't get me wrong, I love my knockout cup football, but that's too much. Thoughts on Celtic's fifth domestic treble in 7 years? Yeah, it's not great for Scottish football. It's good for Celtic, obviously, because they want to win silverware, and that silverware brings prize money, qualification for Europe. Success breeds success. Success breeds players wanting to play there. Investment. The thing is, other Scottish clubs need to win something in order for the Scottish League to become healthy. That's the problem, and that is the issue. Other Scottish clubs need to start winning silverware. If that means another Aberdeen kind of storyline again happening, it needs to happen, because the Scottish game is going backwards, and the national side's going backwards with it. Plain and simple. Change needs to happen. Oh, look, it shows the weakness of the Scottish league system, and why there needs to be serious change done to it. If that means, other clubs get investment, could be a way. But the Scottish FA have proven, and the Scottish Football League have proven over many, many years, that they're not a strong governing set of governing bodies. And I don't know where we go from here with Scottish football. I think it's quite worrying how uncompetitive the league is again. Like, it's not good. Yes, it was refreshing, and it was refreshing when St Johnstone won a cup double. I think Hearts and I think Hibs won a couple of cups, and that was refreshing. However, those other clubs winning silverware are becoming few and far between, and that's the problem. And that's where, and then the lack of success in Scottish clubs in Europe as well. It's just, I mean, if Rangers win that Europa League last year, we're having a different conversation. If Rangers won, against Zenit St. Petersburg in 2008, we're having a different conversation. That didn't happen. So yeah, the non-league winners is more. How do you mean more worrying? There's got to be a better way for Scottish football to become. There's got to be a way that Scottish football can become more competitive. There has to be, because the old firm is slowly killing the Scottish game, killing it. It's just killing it, because it's been how long since a Scottish club has won a European title? How long has it been since a club not called Rangers or Celtics won the Scottish League? That is a big concern. And this is why when Leicester won the Premier League, it was refreshing. This is when Liverpool, admittedly, they've won a lot of league titles in the past. Winning their first Premier League in the Premier League era was refreshing. However, it is troubling where we're currently at. It really is. I mean, St Johnstone winning that cup double a couple of years ago was fantastic. It was. Um, so it's just really, there has to be, someone has to come in and go look at a Scottish football club and go, I'm a wealthy person, I'm buying that club. Let's make that club competitive. Let's win. And I would love it to be Hibs or Hearts or Partick or Motherwell or Aberdeen again, St Johnstone, Kilmarnock, whoever it may be. It has to happen. Someone has got to be brave and go, I'm going to buy that football club and turn them into a winner. Oh, look, it is ridiculous. They play each other domestically 4 times a season. There's talk. There's an idea that I have where you combine the top 2 leagues in Scottish football into one league and the next 2 leagues into the second league, and then restructure it that way. You play each other twice. That might make it a bit more competitive, but unless someone, or maybe 16 teams state possibly is a way to go. Unless someone can come along who is wealthy, or a couple of wealthy individuals, or consortiums come along and go, we're going to buy that club, and that club, and wealthy owners, instead of going for the English Premier League, going for the Scottish Premier League, and a team not called Rangers or Celtic, we're going to see this for another 30 years. Because I cannot see where the next Scottish football club is going to come from to challenge them. I can't. And Scotland is not as wealthy as the rest of the UK, as a general rule. There's parts of Scotland that are quite wealthy, but it's not. Attendances aren't great outside of a handful of clubs. Stadium infrastructure isn't great. A lot of clubs are struggling to make money. A combined UK league does not work. That idea has been put forward a few times. It just doesn't work. And you would have to get all the FAs on board for that to happen, and the various boards of the Premier League, Football League, and Scottish League to get on board for that to happen. It's not going to happen. It never happened. That's the problem. Never happened. Wales is different, yes. Wales is different, but Scotland will always resist a combined league system. The only sport where we have a combined league system for the whole of the UK is ice hockey. uh, with the Elite League. Then the second tier, you've got the National League in England and Wales. You've got the Scottish National League in Scotland, and it's a divided governance structure, and money's tight. But that's the only league where we have a national league system at the top level, which has a decent TV deal, decent sponsorship deals, and decent quality of play. Football, it will never happen. Never happen. Not in a million years. And for those idealists, those utopian idealists who want it to happen, fine, but it just will not happen. Um, the history is too entrenched, the fans are too entrenched, and the clubs are too entrenched. But it would be nice to see a wealthy owner or a group of investors come in and go, right, we're going to take Hibs, for example, or um, Aberdeen, Motherwell, Kilmarnock, St Johnstone, Partick, another club, and go, right, we're going to invest in this club or those clubs. You know, do a Wrexham with what Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney have done, or and then drive that growth. And until someone is brave enough to take that risk, it's not going to happen. I think Hibs at the moment, Hibs and Aberdeen are the best positioned to take it to um, the old firm. But Aberdeen, I think their window's shut on them, and Hibs haven't quite taken that next step. Hearts had their moment in the early 2000s. That hasn't materialised as taking that next step. Um, but it has to happen at some point, otherwise, where do we go from here? That's the problem. But also, player development is a problem as well. Where is that next generation of Scottish talent coming from? Where is that next, high-profile Dalglish, Souness, McCoist coming from? Where is that next marketable star who is a high-quality player coming from? I just can't see it. Imagine how much interest would be if Scottish Football, if they say Hearts was challenging. That'd be fantastic. Hearts or Hibs going for it would be fantastic. But sadly, it hasn't happened since Ferguson was at Aberdeen. So I honestly do not know where that next step is going to be, and that next challenger. And yeah, then you have to look at the TV deal that the SPL has signed, what it's worth, how they market themselves to the overseas audience, how they try and attract the American audience, because there's a large Scots-Irish, a large Scottish population on the East Coast historically of um, immigrants historically. The fact that it's flawed. I mean, they play the old firm 4 times a night. They have to change the structure of the league. They have to merge with the league below and adjust the league structure. They have to. Um, it's their only chance, really. It's the only chance. Um, but we are where we are. And again, weak governance and poor governance. And a lot of fans don't particularly like the Scottish FA and the Scottish Professional Football League structure. And they're not big fans of the administrators and the direction the league is taking. It is a problem, massive problem. So as I say, we'll have to see what happens going forward. Yeah, look, I would love to see Scottish football get back on its pedestal that it was back in the early half of the 80s, where Celtic and Rangers weren't winning titles. It was Aberdeen, it was Dundee United. I think Motherwell had a good couple of seasons. And this is where I do the club histories. I'm like, okay, they were winning. It wasn't always Rangers and Celtic winning every year. But unfortunately, what's happened is Ferguson leaves Aberdeen. Alex Ferguson leaves Aberdeen, and you know the rest, as they say, is history. And there's some other great Scottish teams in the 70s and 80s as well, who that was the peak of Scottish football. It just it's been over a generation now of the old club. Yes and no. One, yes and no. It's like Liverpool, where one brother, let's say you've got two brothers, one's a Dundee fan, one's a Dundee United fan. It's like that. Um, they share one hooligan firm, for example, Dundee and Dundee United. Um, it truly is a bizarre rivalry. It's a friendly rivalry. Um, it is a very. They're divided by like 50 meters, I think, between the two stadiums on a road. Yeah, you could go to Dundee one week, Dundee United the next week. Be expensive to follow two teams, but yeah, it's one of those cities where one club's on one side of the road, the other club's on the other, and Dundee itself, the city is it's a friendly rivalry. You go in a pub and there'll be a Dundee and a Dundee United fan drinking together. It's one of them. There is a bit of spite in the rivalry, but that goes back to the foundation of both clubs. One was a Protestant club, one was Catholic, and then they got rid of the sectarianism very, very quickly um, between the two clubs. And it's it's a unique situation in Dundee with the two top clubs. Um, very, very unique, very interesting as well. And I've done club histories on both, so um, and yeah, they are very, very interesting clubs. And interesting to look at, interesting to study the history behind them. Um, and yeah, it is what it is. In regards to Postecoglou and whether he leaves or stays Celtic, I think he's linked with the Spurs job. But remember, he's not their first choice. This happened last time. He's not their first choice on their wish list. So Spurs aren't getting their first choice manager. Celtic are losing a manager who's got them back to winning a treble and unseating Rangers. Um, and I think because he's not the first choice manager at Spurs, when things do start to go wrong at Spurs, that's how they go. They lose a couple of games, which, bear in mind, with his time at Celtic, he's not used to losing many games. That's going to be um, interesting. Um, People don't rate any manager that manages Celtic and Rangers to success. Is that fair? No, I don't think it is. I mean, Brendan Rodgers had his successful little spurt at Leicester before it went downhill, and he managed Celtic for a long time. Obviously, Gerrard didn't work at Villa. That doesn't mean he's a bad manager. It just didn't work at Villa. Um, Van Bronckhorst had success before he went to Rangers. So I don't think that's fair. I think the problem is because obviously um, the lack of I mean, if let's say, I mean, Steve Clarke did it with did a good, you know, had his moment, and he didn't manage either of them, and he's one of the best Scottish managers out there, and now he's the national manager. And then you have who was the guy who managed St Johnson to the cup double? You know, I I think that's an unfair. I think that's armchair fans on social media. Um, Ferguson didn't coach either of those two, and he's the most successful Scottish manager in history. And he didn't coach either of them. He coached Aberdeen. So I find that one bizarre, absolutely bizarre. People don't rate people who managers. That's armchair critics. That's you know armchair fans south of the border, um, who really don't understand sport at all. Um, they're, and I think that's an unfair comparison. Quite honestly. So I don't get that. I really don't, because I mean I think Wales is one of the worst leagues in the world. I've been to a Welsh Premier game. It's dire. Again, it's lack of investment. It's lack of funding. It's crumbling infrastructure. A whole range of issues. Um, and the rural nature of a large, about 80% of Wales is very rural. Not a wealthy country in certain locations. There are some very poor areas as well. So there's a lack of money. There's a lack of interest, and the biggest clubs play in the English league system. So any clubs that would generate revenue for the league don't play in the league. This is the argument about not allowing the old firm into the English league system, is you destroy Scottish football stone dead. You would kill it. And I think Celtic and Rangers realise that if they join the English league system, they're not making Europe, which means they don't make money. So, and so there is that. But no, the Welsh league system, there's no money in it. That Welsh sport, there's no money in Welsh sport. We've discussed this before. We've discussed this at length every time I do a live stream. It's the state of Welsh professional sport. It's in a complete and utter mess, and partly it's due to governance, sporting infrastructure, investment. Um, so yeah, the counter argument to the Scottish, it's in a better state than if they weren't in it, but it's going to take someone brave to invest in a club like Aberdeen or Partick or Motherwell or Falkirk or in whatever other club, insert club name here, or several wealthy investors in several clubs to change the narrative, um, and change the direction that we're headed. Um, and when St Johnstone won that cup double, I thought this is the moment. This is the time when okay, we suddenly have this interest in the Scottish league system. When Kilmarnock were battling at the top of the Scottish Premiership back in 2018, that was the moment. That period of time before COVID was the moment where, hang on a second, we have a chance here, and it just hasn't happened. Um, and that's the problem. Um, I can do some more club histories of some Scottish clubs, and we can look at their historical success and their lack of it in more recent times because of the last 40 years, basically, the last 40 so years. The count, but I don't know how you arrest the change. Do more than half of Scotland support the old firm? I think Rangers have got the biggest fan base, and for per capita, it's the most supported league in the world population size. But you won't find many Rangers fans in Aberdeen, for example. And you won't find many Celtic fans in Edinburgh because you've got Hibs as the sectarian, Catholic club. Um, and Partick is that other club in Glasgow who are non-sectarian. So for those who don't like that side of fandom in Scotland, you've got that, and you've got Queen's Park, the most historical club in Scotland. Um, so Scottish fandom is very interesting. Glasgow is a big city, um, big metropolitan area, and you've got four professional clubs in Glasgow who play in the top two divisions. Just two of them have to call the old firm, and you've got Partick and Queen's Park. But no, I think Rangers is the most. It's like Rangers is like Juventus in Italy. They are the best supported club. Um, But in saying that, some of the other cities, like Edinburgh, have professional clubs. Aberdeen's obviously a one-club city. Um, why? That was back in 2019. I think they decided they had to in order to reach a higher level again, get back to the top. They were very proud of their amateur status, but in order to attract players and to remain competitive and stay at the level they're at, and they've got Owen Coyle as manager, and he's a decent manager. I think they ultimately want to get to the promised land of the top flight, and they want to attract players, and investment. And in order to do that, you've got to be professional. Hamden was having it. They've moved. That's another complicated one. I'll have to look into the reasons for that. But without Queen's Park, you don't have Hamden Park, so there is that as well. Without Queen's Park, you may not get the direction the Scottish football has taken. Integral club to the Scottish, one of the oldest football clubs in the world. And without them, you don't have Scottish football developed the way it did in the early days. Yes, they are. They are the only Scottish club to make an FA Cup final. They are a very interesting club with a very interesting history, and we will definitely look at their club history at some point, and I will enjoy doing it. And I think the viewership figures for that will be very, very, very interesting, personally. I think the viewership figures for that will be a lot higher than people expect. And I've got a lot of Scottish subscribers to the channel, a lot of Scottish viewers to the channel. And I do think, looking at some of these Scottish clubs who are called Rangers or Celtic, and then driving that conversation, this is what it needs: is someone to invest. That'd be Cardiff. Cardiff are the only Welsh club to win an FA Cup final, and to appear in more than one FA Cup final. Obviously, Swansea are the only Welsh club to appear in a League Cup final and win the League Cup final. So the debate about who's the better Welsh club between Swansea and Cardiff is going to rage on until one or both of them are back in the Premier League, and then Wrexham will go, well, we're the oldest Welsh club, and then you've got Newport County, who are just there. And again, the interest with, I think I've done all the Welsh English-based clubs in their club histories, but there are, every time I do a club history video, it automatically becomes dated. I will say that. So if West Ham win tomorrow, next week, in the conference final, that West Ham video is a year out of date. I haven't done Merthyr Tydfil yet, but they're not in the top professional leagues at the moment. They're not in the top 4 leagues at the moment. So unless they were to suddenly win the National League and get promotion back to the Football League, we can look at Merthyr Tydfil and where they're at, but they're not on the same level as the other Welsh clubs in the English league system by a long stretch. But it is what it is. I think they have been in the National League. I think they have, yes, but they're not close to the Football League, and so you won't get many views on that one. But look, as I say, the West Ham video, if they win next week, that video becomes very, very dated. And Fiorentina, I haven't done a video on them yet. I will do a video on Sevilla and AS Roma. I will do a video on some of the Italian clubs like Sampdoria. So yeah. Well, Merthyr is not a wealthy area in Wales. All the old industries have closed down. Unemployment's high. There's not a lot of money in the community, and so that has an impact on profits they can make and how much money they can make. Yeah, that's the problem with Wales. It's exceptionally rural country. Outside of the south, and the border regions of England near like Wrexham and Welshpool, for example, and bits near Anglesey, like Rill and Porthmadog. There's not a lot of urban areas that are big, and there's not a lot of money. It's a very rural country with poor infrastructure. And there's only one motorway in Wales, for example. Oh, technically two if you count the M. Is it the M48? The other little motorway over the Severn. They've only got two motorways in Wales, and yeah, all the money's in Swansea, Cardiff, and Pembrokeshire. So there's not a lot of money. There's not a lot of investment, and domestic sport in Wales is a bit of a mess. Hence why biggest clubs in Wales play in the English league system, and rugby union they have to share a top flight league system with the United Rugby Championship in order to survive, and they're not surviving very well. Technically, there's two motorways in Wales because you've got the M48. That's like it for a few miles over the River Severn, but basically it's one major motorway, which is the M4. So there's that lack of transport infrastructure, very rural in places, high unemployment in certain areas, low average salaries, and that lack of infrastructure investment ultimately hurts the sporting investment as well. And so that is a massive issue. Massive issue. Right, we have been going now for 3.5 hours. I'm going to call it an evening because I need to get my dinner on. But thank you very much for all your questions. And we'll see how West Ham do against Fiorentina. And then we'll see how Man City do against Inter Milan. And that'll be the end of the European football season. And then transfer season. Transfers and who becomes the next Tottenham manager. What does happen to Harry Kane? It'll be interesting if West Ham win. I think that changes the narrative of their season, and it might entice players to stay. There are rumours that like Declan Rice, for example, and Gary Bowen may be on the way out to play elsewhere. Moyes, his future's under question. If he wins next week, changes the narrative at that football club because they qualified for the European competition above. Revenue and success breeds players who want to join your club, and success breeds money. They win that, it changes the narrative. They haven't won a trophy for a very, very long time. So we shall see. We shall see. We can see all three Italian clubs lose all three European finals. So I don't think that's ever happened, even in the old Cup Winners' Cup era, where one nation's in all three finals with clubs and they lose all three finals. I just don't think that's happened. But anyway, I'm going to leave that there. Thank you very much for watching. I appreciate all the questions. I'll have some more content for you very, very soon.